My son invited me onto his yacht by the shore to spend time together, but when I woke up, he was gone and I was locked inside the cabin during a record-breaking heat wave. No water, no power. 110 degrees inside a steel box. He thought the heat would kill an old man. He thought I would just drift away and leave him my fortune. But he forgot one thing. I survived 30 years in the Navy. I do not die when I am told to. I die when I am ready. Before I tell you how I escaped a floating coffin, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that treachery never goes unpunished. My name is Marcus Holloway. Most people in my quiet coastal town just know me as the old man who walks with a cane and keeps his lawn perfectly manicured. They do not know that for 3 decades I was a Master Chief Petty Officer in the United States Navy. They do not know about the nights I spent in the jungle or the days I spent in the desert where the sun felt like a physical weight on your shoulders. I retired to this house on the Florida coast to find peace, not war. I wanted to listen to the waves, not the sound of gunfire. But as I learned the hard way, sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one holding a rifle across a battlefield. Sometimes the enemy has your last name and sits at your dinner table. It was a Saturday morning in mid-June. The weather forecast had been warning us for days about a heat dome settling over the state. The air was thick and heavy like breathing through a wet wool blanket. I was on my front porch cleaning my fishing gear. It is a ritual of mine. Grease the reels, check the line, polish the rods. It keeps my hands busy and my mind sharp. I heard the car before I saw it. A brand new Range Rover engine roaring like a beast tearing up the gravel of my driveway. I didn't look up immediately. I finished oiling the gear on my Shimano reel. Only then did I set it down and watch the vehicle come to a halt. The doors opened and out stepped my son Dante and his wife Chloe. I hadn't seen them in 6 months. The last time we spoke, it ended with Dante screaming that I was a selfish old miser because I wouldn't invest $500,000 in some digital currency scheme involving pictures of monkeys. I had told him then that money is earned by sweat, not by speculation. He had stormed out, and I hadn't heard a word since. But today they looked different. Dante was wearing a linen shirt and boat shoes, trying to look the part of a wealthy heir. Chloe was in a sundress looking like she had just stepped out of a magazine. But I saw the way her eyes scanned my property. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the house. She was calculating the square footage. She was estimating the market value. Dad Dante called out, putting on a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You look good, really good." I stayed in my chair. "You are on my property, Dante. State your business." Chloe stepped forward, her heels clicking on the porch steps. "Oh, Marcus, don't be like that. It is almost Father's Day. We realized we have been terrible. We missed you. We wanted to make things right." She held out a basket. It was filled with expensive jams and crackers, the kind you buy at the airport when you forget to get a real gift. I looked at the basket, and then I looked at her. "You drove 4 hours to give me jam?" I asked. Dante laughed nervously. "No, Dad. We came to take you out. I just bought a boat. A yacht, actually. A 40-footer. She is a beauty. We want to take you out on the water. Just the 3 of us. No business talk, no arguments, just a day of fishing and relaxing, like we used to do when I was a kid." I looked at my son. I wanted to believe him. Every father wants to believe that his son loves him. I remembered the little boy who used to sit on my lap and ask me to tell him stories about the sea. I missed that boy. But the man standing in front of me had eyes that shifted too much. He was sweating, and it wasn't just the heat. "I don't know, Dante," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "It is going to be a scorcher today. The news said we might hit triple digits." "That is why being on the water is perfect," Chloe chimed in. "The ocean breeze, Marcus. We have the AC cranking in the cabin. We have a fridge full of cold beer and that scotch you like. Please, give Dante a chance to apologize properly." I hesitated. My gut instinct, the one that had kept me alive through 3 tours of duty, was whispering that something was wrong. Why now? Why the sudden generosity? Dante was broke. I knew he was broke because my friend Vance had told me Dante's credit cards were maxed out, so how did he afford a yacht? But then I looked at his face. There was a desperation there. Maybe he really did want to reconnect. Maybe he realized he was losing his only family. "All right," I said, standing up. "I will go, but I drive myself to the marina." "Great," Dante said, clapping his hands. "We are docked at the private slip, the Silver King." I went inside to change. I put on my lightweight cargo pants and a breathable shirt. I grabbed my hat. Then I walked to my dresser. In the bottom drawer, wrapped in a velvet cloth, was my old military watch. It wasn't a Rolex, it was a heavy-duty tactical piece, bulky and scarred from years of abuse. It had a built-in GPS beacon and a battery that could last for a decade. It was ugly as sin and worth more to me than gold. I strapped it on. It felt heavy on my wrist, a familiar weight. When I walked back out, Chloe wrinkled her nose. "You are wearing that old thing?" she asked. "Dante has a Rolex he could lend you for the day. You know, to look the part." "This watch tells time just fine," I said, "and it doesn't need to be wound." We drove to the marina in separate cars. The heat was already rising, shimmering off the asphalt. When I saw the yacht, I raised an eyebrow. The Silver King was impressive. Sleek, modern, white fiberglass gleaming in the sun. It was far too expensive for Dante. He must have leased it or chartered it for the day just to impress me. We boarded. The deck was hot enough to fry an egg, but inside the main cabin the air conditioning was blasting. It was freezing in there. Chloe immediately went to the bar. "Scotch Marcus," she asked, holding up a bottle of Macallan 18. "It is 10 in the morning, Chloe," I said. "It is 5 o'clock somewhere," she smiled, pouring a glass that was 3 fingers deep. "Come on, a toast, to family." I took the glass. I didn't want to drink. Alcohol dulls the senses and I needed my wits about me, but I didn't want to start a fight either. "To family," I said. I brought the glass to my lips. I let the liquid touch my tongue, then I pretended to swallow. When she turned to hand a beer to Dante, I spit the scotch back into the glass, holding it in my cheek until I could grab a napkin. I had done this 100 times at diplomatic dinners where staying sober was a matter of national security. We cast off. Dante took the wheel. He steered us out of the marina and into the open water. The ocean was calm, flat as a mirror. The sun beat down relentlessly. I sat on the stern watching the coastline fade away. After about an hour, I noticed something. We weren't heading toward the usual fishing spots. We were heading south toward the dead zone, a stretch of water known for its stillness and lack of boat traffic. It was isolated. "Dante," I called out, walking up to the bridge. "Why are we heading this way? The fish are running north near the reef." Dante didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the horizon. "Just wanted to find a quiet spot, Dad, away from the tourists. Chloe wants to sunbathe without people staring." I checked my phone. 1 bar of service, then 0. No signal. We were miles offshore. Alone. Chloe came up from the lower deck. She had changed into a bikini and was holding another drink. "Here you go, Marcus," she said, handing me a fresh glass. "You finished the last one so fast I thought you needed a refill." I took it. "Thanks," I said. I pretended to take a large gulp. I stumbled a little, grabbing the railing for support. "Whoa, Dad," Dante said, looking back. "You okay?" "Just the heat," I lied. "And the scotch. I am not used to drinking this early. I think I need to lay down for a bit." Chloe's eyes lit up. It was a subtle reaction, but I saw it. A flash of triumph. "Of course, Marcus," she said, her voice overly sweet. "The guest cabin is downstairs. It is nice and cool. Why don't you take a nap? We will wake you when lunch is ready." She guided me down the stairs. The lower deck was a narrow hallway with 3 doors. The master cabin, the engine room, and a small guest cabin near the bow. "This one is the quietest," she said, opening the door to the guest cabin. I walked in. It was small, windowless, except for a tiny porthole that was sealed shut. There was a bunk bed and a small metal locker. The air conditioning vent was humming, blowing cold air. "Thanks, Chloe," I said, sitting on the bed. "I just need an hour." "Take your time," she said. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching me. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her face was blank cold. "Sleep tight, Marcus," she whispered. She closed the door. I heard the latch click. Then I heard something else. A sound that no guest should ever hear. The sound of a heavy metal deadbolt sliding into place from the outside. Clack. I sat there for a second, my heart rate steady despite the adrenaline dumping into my system. I stood up and walked to the door. I tried the handle. Locked. I knocked. "Chloe, Dante." "The door is stuck." Silence. I knocked harder. Dante quit playing around. "Open the door." I heard footsteps on the deck above. Then I heard the engines throttle down. The hum of the boat changed. We were drifting. Then the most terrifying thing happened. The air conditioning vent stopped humming. The lights flickered and died. The cabin plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the thin beam of sunlight coming through the tiny porthole. The silence was sudden and absolute. Then I heard the splash. It was the sound of a smaller boat hitting the water. A tender. A dinghy. I pressed my ear against the metal door. I could hear the faint sound of an outboard motor starting up. They were leaving. They had brought me out to the middle of nowhere, locked me in a steel box, cut the power, and left me. I checked my watch. The temperature gauge on the tactical face read 75 degrees. But without the AC and with the sun beating down on the white hull above, that number would climb. It would climb fast. I looked around the small room. No water, no food. Just a bed and a metal locker. I sat back down on the bunk. Most men would panic. Most men would scream and bang on the door until they exhausted their oxygen. But I am not most men. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. So this is the plan, I thought. A heat stroke, an accident. An old man who got drunk fell asleep and the generator failed. A tragedy. I opened my eyes in the dark. "All right, Dante," I whispered to the empty room. "You want to play survival? Let's play." I checked my watch again. 1100 hours. The heat was coming, and I had work to do. The silence that followed the death of the engines was heavier than the humidity. I lay on the narrow bunk in the guest cabin, my eyes closed but my ears straining against the quiet. I was playing the part of the intoxicated old man, the stumbling father who couldn't handle his liquor. I kept my breathing shallow and rhythmic, the way a man sleeps when the alcohol has pulled him under. But beneath my eyelids, my pupils were moving, tracking every sound from the deck above. I heard the heavy thud of footsteps, Dante's boat shoes squeaking on the fiberglass, Chloe's heels clicking a sharp staccato rhythm. They were moving quickly. There was no laughter now, no clinking of glasses, just the urgent movements of people who had a schedule to keep. Then came the sound that made my blood run cold. It was the distinctive mechanical clank of the generator shutting down. On a yacht like the Silver King, the generator is the heart. It pumps life into the vessel. It powers the lights, the navigation systems, and most importantly, in the middle of a Florida heat wave, it powers the air conditioning. When the generator died, the hum of the AC vent above my head sputtered and ceased. The flow of cool air stopped instantly. The silence in the small windowless cabin became absolute. It felt like the air itself had been sucked out of the room. I waited. I heard the whir of a winch. They were lowering the tender, the small motorized dinghy attached to the stern. Jump in Chloe's voice drifted down through the ventilation shaft. "Hurry up, Dante. I don't want to be here when he wakes up." "He won't wake up," Dante replied, his voice trembling slightly. "Not with the amount of scotch he drank. By the time he realizes what is happening, it will be too late." The splash of the tender hitting the water was loud. Then the pull of the starter cord. The outboard motor coughed once, then roared to life. I lay there for 10 seconds longer, counting the beats of my own heart. I listened as the sound of the small motor faded into the distance, growing fainter and fainter until it was swallowed by the vast indifference of the ocean. They were gone. I opened my eyes. The cabin was pitch black save for the thin beam of cruel sunlight slicing through the sealed porthole. I sat up. The first thing I noticed was the temperature. It had only been a few minutes since the AC died, but the difference was already palpable. A boat is essentially a fiberglass shell sitting in direct sunlight. Without cooling, it becomes a greenhouse, a solar oven. And today, with the mercury outside hitting 105 degrees, that oven was set to broil. I swung my legs off the bunk and moved to the door. I knew it was locked. I had heard the click earlier, but I had to check. I had to know what I was up against. I grabbed the handle. It was cold steel. I turned it. It didn't budge. It wasn't just locked. There was no give, no rattle. I pressed my shoulder against it and shoved. I am 73 years old, but I still have the shoulders that carried rucksacks through the Mekong Delta. I put my weight into it. Solid. I ran my fingers along the edge of the frame. I realized with a sinking feeling what they had done. This wasn't a standard privacy lock. They had barred it from the outside. A steel crossbar dropped into brackets. It was a modification, a customized trap. This was premeditated. Dante didn't just rent a boat for a day trip. He prepared a cell. I took a step back and assessed my environment. The cabin was roughly 8 feet by 10 feet. The walls were padded with beige vinyl. The floor was carpeted. It was designed for comfort, but stripped of power and air, it was a padded coffin. Water. That was the first priority. The heat was already rising. I could feel the sweat prickling on my forehead. I needed hydration. I turned to the small mini-fridge built into the cabinetry. I prayed to a god I hadn't spoken to in years that Dante had been lazy, that he had forgotten to empty it. I pulled the door open. The light inside didn't turn on because the power was cut. I reached into the darkness expecting to feel the cold glass of water bottles or the aluminum of soda cans. My hand met empty wire racks. I felt around frantically. Nothing. I checked the side door shelves. Nothing. It was bone dry. I stood up and slammed the fridge door shut. The sound echoed in the small space. They had stripped it. They had removed every single bottle, every single drop of liquid. This wasn't just abandonment. This was torture. I leaned against the wall and felt the heat radiating through the hull. The sun was beating down on the deck directly above my head. The white fiberglass was absorbing the solar radiation and transferring it straight into this metal box. I checked my tactical watch. The temperature gauge was climbing. 80 degrees, 82. It was rising by the minute. I sat back down on the bunk. The air was starting to feel heavy, stagnant. The smell of diesel fuel and old carpet was becoming suffocating. My mind raced. They want me to die of heat stroke, hyperthermia. It is a clean way to kill. No bullets, no bruises, no poison in the blood. Just an old man who got drunk, passed out, and died when the yacht systems tragically failed. A terrible accident. Dante would cry at the funeral. Chloe would wear black and hide her smile behind a veil. They would sue the charter company for negligence and collect the settlement along with my life insurance. It was brilliant, it was evil, and it was happening right now. Panic clawed at the back of my throat. It is a primal instinct. The lizard brain screaming that you are trapped, that you are burning, that you are going to die in the dark. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pound on the door until my knuckles bled. I wanted to curse my son's name until my voice gave out. I took a breath. The air was hot and tasted of dust. No. I closed my eyes. I am Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Holloway. I have survived the jungles of Vietnam. I have survived the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. I have survived 3 decades of service to the United States Navy. I do not panic. Panic is a waste of oxygen. Panic raises the heart rate. Panic increases body temperature. If I panic, I die. I opened my eyes. The fear was still there, but I shoved it into a box in the back of my mind and locked it tight. I looked at the temperature gauge again. 88 degrees. The human body can survive high temperatures for a short time, but without water, and with the humidity rising, the body's cooling mechanism fails. Sweat doesn't evaporate. The core temperature rises. At 104 degrees, you get heat exhaustion. At 107 degrees, your organs start to cook. I calculated the timeline. It was noon. The sun would be at its peak for the next 4 hours. The cabin would reach 110, maybe 120 degrees within the hour. I had maybe 3 hours before I lost consciousness, maybe less. I looked around the room again, this time not as a victim, but as a soldier. There were no windows to break. The porthole was too small for a man of my size to crawl through, even if I could smash the reinforced glass. The door was barred. The walls were steel-plated behind the vinyl. I was in a kiln. But every ship has a weakness. Every vessel has a system. I looked at the ceiling, the air conditioning vent. It was a small square grate, maybe 10 inches by 10 inches, too small to crawl through. I looked at the floor. The carpet was glued down. Then I looked at the wall adjoining the engine room. The guest cabin on a 40-footer is usually tucked right up against the bulkhead of the engine compartment. I placed my hand on the wall. It was hot, hotter than the others. The engines had been running hard for an hour. The iron blocks on the other side of that wall were radiating heat like a furnace. But where there are engines, there is air intake. Where there are engines, there is bilge access. I knelt down on the floor. I pulled the small pen light from my pocket. I always carry a light. Another habit from the Navy. I shined it under the bunk. There, bolted into the floorboards, was a small inspection hatch. It was meant for mechanics to check the hull integrity or access the bilge pumps. It was small, maybe 18 inches wide, but it led to the bilge, the crawl space beneath the deck. The bilge would be filthy. It would be full of oil and seawater. It would be cramped, but it would be wet. And right now, wet meant alive. I wiped the sweat from my eyes. Dante thought he had locked me in a room. He forgot that a ship is a living thing. He forgot that I know ships better than I know my own son. I pulled the multi-tool from my belt. I unfolded the screwdriver. The heat was oppressive now. My shirt was soaked. My mouth was dry as sandpaper. I looked at the screws on the inspection hatch, rusted, painted over. I smiled a grim, tight smile. You want to cook me, Dante? You want to see if the old man can take the heat? I jammed the screwdriver into the first screw head. Let's see who burns first. The heat inside the cabin was no longer a weather condition, it was a physical predator. It had weight. It had texture. It pressed against my eardrums and settled deep in my lungs, making every breath feel like I was inhaling broken glass. I looked at the tactical watch on my wrist. The digital display seemed to shimmer in the low light. 122 degrees Fahrenheit, 50 degrees Celsius. In the Navy, they teach you that the human body is a machine. It has coolant systems. It has pumps. It has regulators. But like any machine, if you run it past the red line for too long, the gaskets blow. My skin had stopped sweating 10 minutes ago. That was the first warning sign. When you stop sweating, it means your body has run out of water to give. It means your internal temperature is climbing toward the point of no return. The headache started at the base of my skull, a rhythmic thumping that matched the slow, heavy beat of my heart. Thump, thump, thump. I sat on the floor with my back against the metal inspection hatch I had just pried open. The air down here was stagnant and smelled of diesel fuel and old grease, but it was marginally cooler than the air trapped against the ceiling. Heat rises. That is basic physics. If I stood up, my head would be in the kill zone. So I stayed low. I became a creature of the floor. I needed to lower my core temperature. I needed to cool the blood flowing to my brain before the neurons started to misfire and cook. I looked around the room through the haze of heat that was starting to blur my vision. The luxury curtains. Chloe had bragged about them earlier. Italian silk, she said. Hand-stitched. They hung over the fake porthole purely for decoration, blocking nothing but the steel hull. I crawled over to them. My movements were sluggish. My joints felt like they were filled with sand. I grabbed the expensive fabric and pulled. I didn't care about the cost. I didn't care about the damage deposit. I ripped them off the rod with a savage grunt, tearing the silk down the middle. I dragged the bundle of cloth back to the inspection hatch. I shone my penlight into the hole. Down there in the bilge, about 2 feet below the deck, was the dirty secret of every boat. Bilge water. It is a foul mixture of seawater leaking through the shaft seals, condensation dripping from the hull, and oil leaking from the engines. It is toxic. It is filthy. It smells like a mechanic's rag that has been left in the sun for a week. But it is liquid. And liquid conducts heat away from the body 25 times faster than air. I shoved the silk curtains into the hole. I pushed them down into the black sludge until they were soaked through. I let them absorb the filth. When I pulled them out, they were heavy, dripping with gray slime and smelling of hydrocarbons. To anyone else, this would be disgusting. To a man dying of heat stroke, it was salvation. I stripped off my shirt. I wrapped the wet chemical-soaked silk around my neck, covering the jugular veins. I wrapped another piece around my head. I shoved the rest into my armpits and groin, where the major arteries run close to the surface. The shock of the wet cloth made me gasp. It wasn't cold water. It was lukewarm soup. But compared to the 120-degree air, it felt like ice. I lay back on the carpet, spreading my limbs out like a starfish to maximize surface area. Now came the hard part. The waiting. I closed my eyes and focused on my breathing. In the Navy survival school known as SEER, they teach you to control the panic. Survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. I was in the resistance phase. I was resisting the urge to pass out. Box breathing. In for 4 seconds. Hold for 4 seconds. Out for 4 seconds. Hold for 4 seconds. In. 2, 3, 4. The smell of the diesel fumes from the wet rags was making me nauseous. My stomach cramped violently, trying to reject the heat. I swallowed the bile. I couldn't afford to vomit. Vomiting loses fluids. Losing fluids means death. Hold. 2, 3, 4. My mind started to drift. The heat does that. It loosens the anchors of reality. I wasn't on the yacht anymore. I was back in the Mekong Delta, lying in the mud, waiting for a patrol to pass. The heat was the same. The smell of rot was the same. Out. 2, 3, 4. No. Focus, Marcus. You are not in Vietnam. You are in Florida. You are in a box built by your son. Dante. The name floated through my mind like a curse. I pictured him on the tender, speeding away toward the shore. He would be drinking a cold beer right now. He would be laughing with Chloe, telling her how easy it was. The old man is gone. The inheritance is ours. Anger is a fuel, but it burns hot. I couldn't afford the heat of anger right now. I needed the cold ice of discipline. I checked my watch again. Or I tried to. The numbers were swimming. Was it 1,300 hours? 1,400. Time was losing its meaning. Then the room changed. The darkness of the cabin seemed to brighten. The oppressive white walls faded away. I saw her in the corner of the room. Beatrice, my wife. My beautiful Beatrice, who had been gone for 10 years. She was wearing the yellow sundress she wore to the church picnic in 1995. She looked cool. She looked radiant. She wasn't sweating. She was standing by the door smiling at me with that gentle patience she always had when I came home from a long deployment. "Marcus," she said, her voice soft as a breeze. "You look tired, baby." I blinked. The sweat stung my eyes. "B," I croaked. My voice was a dry rasp. "What are you doing here?" "I came to get you," she said, reaching out a hand. "It is hot in here, Marcus. It is so hot. Why don't you just let go? Come with me. It is cool where I am. There is a breeze. There is iced tea." I stared at her. She looked so real. I could smell her perfume, lavender and vanilla, cutting through the stench of the diesel. I wanted to go to her. God help me, I wanted to take her hand. My body was screaming for release. It would be so easy to just close my eyes and drift away, to stop fighting, to let the heat take me. "Just sleep, Marcus," she whispered, taking a step closer. "You fought enough wars. You raised a son. You did your duty. You can rest now. Rest." The words sounded like a lullaby. I lifted my hand toward her. My fingers were trembling. But then I saw it. Behind her, standing in the shadow, was Dante. He wasn't smiling. He was checking his watch. He was waiting for me to take her hand so he could cash the check. If I died, I lost. If I died, they won. They would take my house. They would take my money. They would erase everything I had built. They would turn my legacy into a joke. "No," I whispered. Beatrice's smile faltered. "Marcus, baby, please." "No, Beatrice," I said louder this time, forcing the hallucination to shudder. "I can't come with you. Not yet." "Why?" she asked, looking sad. "Because I have a job to do," I growled. "I have to teach the boy a lesson." I squeezed my eyes shut. I bit down on my lip until I tasted the copper tang of blood. The pain was sharp. The pain was real. It cut through the fog. I opened my eyes. Beatrice was gone. The yellow dress was gone. There was only the white wall and the heat and the smell of my own dying body. I rolled over onto my stomach. The movement made the room spin. I dry-heaved my stomach, convulsing around emptiness. "I am not dying today," I hissed into the carpet. "I am Master Chief Marcus Holloway, and I do not give permission for this ship to be my coffin." I looked at the inspection hatch again. The dark hole leading into the bowels of the boat. I had cooled down enough to think. The rags had bought me time. But time was running out. The cabin was getting hotter. If I stayed here, I would die. I needed to move. I needed to get out. The door was impossible. The porthole was impossible. That left only one way. I shined my light into the bilge hole. It was tight. It was filthy. It was a maze of pipes and wires and structural ribs, but it led to the engine room, and the engine room had ventilation shafts. Big ones. I dragged myself toward the hole. "I am coming for you, Dante," I whispered. I shoved my head into the darkness. The heat was waiting, but so was the devil. And today, I was the devil. The darkness under the floorboards was not empty. It was filled with the smell of stagnant oil and the hum of my own blood rushing in my ears. I was in the bilge, the lowest point of the vessel, the gut of the beast. It was cramped, barely high enough for me to crawl on my elbows and knees, dragging my body through a sludge of grease and seawater that coated my skin like a second layer of sweat. But it was here, amidst the filth, that I found my salvation. I shined my penlight upward. There it was. The intake shaft for the starboard engine. A yacht like this breathes through massive vents on the side of the hull. Those vents lead to ducts, and those ducts lead to the engine room. If I could get into that duct, I could crawl up and out onto the deck. But there was a problem. A heavy steel mesh grate blocked the opening. It was held in place by 4 industrial screws. They were painted over rusted by the salt air and tightened by a machine. I reached for my belt. It was an old Navy-issue web belt, the kind with a solid brass buckle and a sliding lock. I took it off. The buckle was thick with a flat edge. It wasn't a screwdriver, but in the hands of a desperate man, it was a tool. I jammed the edge of the brass buckle into the slot of the first screw. The rust crunched. I applied torque. My hands were slippery with oil and sweat. The buckle slipped, gouging a deep trench into my thumb. I didn't feel the pain. Pain is just information. It tells you the body is alive. I wiped my hand on my pants and tried again. I gritted my teeth until my jaw ached. I channeled every ounce of frustration, every ounce of rage at Dante and Chloe into that small piece of brass. "Turn," I commanded. The screw shrieked a high-pitched sound of metal shearing against metal. It turned a quarter inch, then another, one down, three to go. The heat down here was different. It wasn't the dry, baking heat of the cabin. It was a wet, suffocating heat like being inside a lung. My vision was tunneling. Black spots danced in the beam of my light. I worked methodically. Turn, slip, bleed, turn again. The second screw stripped. The head was rounded off by the rust. I cursed. I slammed my fist against the hull. The sound echoed dully. I couldn't give up. I jammed the buckle in at an angle, hammering it with the heel of my hand until it bit into the soft metal of the screw head. I twisted with everything I had. It moved. By the time I got the fourth screw out, my hands were raw meat. My fingernails were broken. But the grate was loose. I kicked it. It clattered down into the bilge water, splashing oily muck into my face. I wiped my eyes. I looked up. The duct was a square tunnel lined with galvanized steel. It was narrow, maybe 18 inches wide. I have broad shoulders, shoulders built by decades of lifting crates and pulling lines. It was going to be a tight squeeze. I grabbed the edge of the duct and pulled myself up. The metal was hot. It had been baking in the sun all day and absorbing the heat from the engines. It seared the skin on my forearms. I didn't stop. I pulled my torso in. My chest scraped against the bottom. My back scraped against the top. I was a bullet in a barrel. I had to exhale to make my ribcage smaller just an inch forward. I crawled, inch by inch. The air inside the tube was dusty and hot. It tasted of fiberglass insulation. My panic tried to rise again. Claustrophobia is a primal fear, the fear of being stuck, the fear of dying wedged in a metal throat, unable to move forward or backward. I closed my eyes. I remembered the training. I remembered the underwater demolition drills where they tied your hands and feet and threw you into the pool. You don't fight the water. You become part of it. I didn't fight the tube. I became the tube. I wiggled my hips. I pulled with my fingertips. I pushed with my toes. My shirt tore. The skin on my back peeled away against a rivet. I left a trail of blood and sweat on the galvanized steel. Forward. Always forward. Then I saw it. A change in the light. It wasn't the harsh white of the sun. It was the soft blue of moonlight. I reached the end of the duct. There were louvers here, angled slats to keep the rain out. I punched them. They were plastic. They shattered easily. I pushed my head out. The air that hit my face was like a benediction. It was warm and humid, but compared to the hell I had just crawled out of it, felt like the breath of God. I pulled my shoulders through, then my hips. I tumbled out onto the teak deck of the Silver King. I lay there for a long time staring up at the stars. My chest heaved. My body was shaking violently, the adrenaline crash mixing with severe dehydration. I was alive. I rolled over and looked around. The yacht was drifting. The lights were off. It was a ghost ship floating in the black void of the Atlantic. I stood up. My legs wobbled. I had to grab the railing to keep from falling. I looked at the bridge. The radio was there. I could call the Coast Guard. I could fire a flare. I could wait for a helicopter to come and pluck me from the deck. I took a step toward the radio. Then I stopped. If I called for help, Dante would win. He would say it was an accident. He would say the generator failed and the door jammed. He would play the relieved son. He would cry on camera. He would take me home and put me in a nursing home, claiming I was too old and confused to look after myself. He would finish the job slowly with pills and neglect. No. To beat a monster, you have to become a ghost. I looked at the water. It was black and calm. The shore was a distant line of twinkling lights on the horizon. I checked my GPS watch. 2 miles. 2 miles is a warm-up for a SEAL. But for a 73-year-old man who hasn't had water in 10 hours, who has been baked in an oven and flayed in a metal tube, it is a marathon. But I had something Dante didn't know about. I had rage. Rage is a powerful fuel. It burns cleaner than gasoline. I walked to the stern. I found a bottle of warm water in the deck cooler that they had forgotten. I drank it slowly, rationing it, letting it soak into my parched tissues. I stripped off my ruined shirt. I took off my shoes. I kept my pants and my belt. I kept the watch. I climbed over the railing. I didn't dive. I slipped into the water silently. No splash, no sound. The water was warm, but it felt refreshing on my burns. The salt stung my cuts, a sharp reminder that I was still in the fight. I oriented myself toward the lights. I started to swim. Breaststroke. Efficient. Quiet. Head up. One stroke. Glide. Two strokes. Glide. The ocean is vast. It makes you feel small. In the darkness, seeing nothing but black water below you, it is easy to let the fear take over, to imagine sharks, to imagine cramping up and sinking like a stone. I focused on the lights. That is Dante, I told myself. That light is my house. That light is my life. He is trying to steal it. My arms grew heavy. My legs burned with lactic acid. My thirst returned with a vengeance amplified by the mouthfuls of salt water I accidentally swallowed. A mile in my left calf seized up, a cramp so painful it made me gasp and take in water. I coughed, sputtering. I went under. The silence of the underwater world wrapped around me. It was peaceful down there. I kicked to the surface. I floated on my back. I massaged the knot in my muscle. Not today, I whispered to the stars. Not today. I rolled over and started swimming again. I thought about Chloe's smirk. I thought about Dante's weak handshake. I thought about the lock clicking shut. I used their faces as paddles. I used their betrayal as a kickboard. I swam until my mind went blank. I swam until I was just a machine of bone and sinew moving through the liquid dark. And then my foot touched sand. I stood up. The water was waist deep. I stumbled forward, falling onto my hands and knees in the surf. I crawled up the beach, dragging my body out of the ocean like some prehistoric creature evolving for the first time. I collapsed on the dry sand. I was shaking. I was freezing now, despite the heat. I looked back at the ocean. Somewhere out there, the Silver King was drifting empty. Let them find it, I thought. Let them find the empty tomb. I rolled onto my back and closed my eyes. I was alive. And now the real hunt began. The sand was cold against my cheek when I woke up. It was a gritty, abrasive cold that felt like sandpaper scrubbing away the layers of skin I had lost in the ventilation duct. I opened one eye. The sky was bleeding purple and orange, the bruise of a sunrise over the Atlantic. I was alive. That was the first fact I had to process. I was lying face down in the surf line of a mangrove reserve about 3 miles south of where the Silver King was drifting. I coughed, and the sound was like a rake being dragged across gravel. Salt water and bile tasted heavy in my throat. I tried to stand up, but my legs were not ready to cooperate. They felt like lead pipes filled with cement. I rolled onto my back and stared at the clouds. A heron flew overhead, its wings silent against the morning air. It looked down at me with indifference. To nature, I was just another piece of driftwood washed ashore by the tide. To my son, I was a corpse that hadn't sunk yet. I forced myself to sit up. The world spun violently. My head throbbed with a dehydration headache that felt like a railroad spike being driven into my temple. I checked my tactical watch. It was 0500, 5 in the morning. I had been in the water for 6 hours. I had crawled across the bottom of the ocean of my own mortality and surfaced on the other side. I looked down at myself. I was a ruin. My pants were shredded, stained with grease from the bilge and salt from the sea. My chest was a map of lacerations where the galvanized steel of the duct had flayed me. My skin was burnt a deep, angry red from the hours in the solar oven of the cabin. I didn't look like a wealthy logistics mogul. I looked like a monster that had crawled out of a swamp. I stood up. I swayed, but I didn't fall. I couldn't go home. Home was the first place they would look. Home was a crime scene that hadn't been discovered yet. If I walked through my front door now, Dante would spin it. He would say I was delirious. He would say the heat stroke made me imagine the locked door. He would call the doctors and have me committed before I could sign a statement. Number 1, I needed to be a ghost. And ghosts don't go home. They haunt. I started walking. The reserve was a tangle of sawgrass and palmettos. The ground was uneven, punishing my bare feet. Every step was a calculation of pain versus progress. I focused on the horizon. There was a road about a mile inland, a service road that led to the old coastal highway. It took me an hour to reach the asphalt. By then the sun was up and the heat was returning with a vengeance. The humidity wrapped around me like a wet towel. I kept to the tree line, moving with the instinct of a man who spent his 20s avoiding tripwires in the jungle. I saw a few cars pass early morning commuters heading to jobs I used to provide. I didn't wave. I didn't signal. I found what I was looking for 3 miles down the road. Rusty's Bait and Tackle. It was a relic, a crumbling gas station that smelled of dead shrimp and gasoline. There was a payphone on the side of the building. A dinosaur in the age of smartphones, but a lifeline for a man who needed to remain invisible. I walked up to the attendant, a kid with headphones around his neck who looked at me like I was a walking corpse. "I need a quarter," I rasped. My voice sounded like grinding stones. The kid looked at my shredded clothes. He looked at the blood drying on my chest. He didn't ask questions. In this part of Florida, you learn not to ask questions when something ugly walks out of the swamp. He reached into the tip jar and tossed me a coin. I nodded my thanks. I walked to the phone. I dialed a number I had memorized 30 years ago. It rang 4 times. "Yeah," a voice answered. Gruff. Alert. Vance never slept past 4. "Code red," I whispered. "Extraction needed. Sector 4. The old bait shop." There was a silence on the other end. A silence that held the weight of a friendship forged in fire. Vance didn't ask who it was. He didn't ask why. He knew my voice, even when it was broken. "ETA 20 minutes, the voice said. "Sit tight, Mac." I hung up. I slid down the wall of the gas station and waited in the shadow of the ice machine. Vance arrived in 18 minutes. He was driving his old Ford truck, not the Mercedes he used for court. He pulled around the back, shielding me from the road. He stepped out. Vance was a mountain of a man, 60 years old, but built like a linebacker. He took one look at me and his jaw tightened. He didn't say a word. He just opened the passenger door and helped me in. He handed me a canteen of water. I drank it slowly, disciplining myself not to guzzle it and send my body into shock. "Where to?" Vance asked, starting the engine. "Hospital." "Negative," I said. "No hospitals, no paper trail. Take me to the safe house." Vance looked at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes were dark with worry. "You look like hell, Mac. You need a doctor." "I need a ghost," I said. "Just drive Vance." We drove in silence to a small hunting cabin Vance owned deep in the Pine Barrens west of the city. It was off the grid, no internet, no neighbors, just trees and silence. Vance helped me inside. He got the first aid kit. He spent the next hour cleaning my wounds. He scrubbed the grease out of the cuts on my back. He applied burn cream to my face. He hooked me up to an IV drip he kept for emergencies. When he was done, I walked to the bathroom. I needed to see. I looked in the mirror. The man staring back at me was a stranger. My eyes were bloodshot, the whites completely gone, replaced by a web of red veins. My face was gaunt, the skin pulled tight over my cheekbones. My lips were cracked and bleeding. The sunburn had turned my dark skin into a patchwork of peeling blisters. I didn't look like Marcus Holloway, the businessman. I looked like the specter of death. I touched the glass. "This is what he did to me," I whispered. "This is what my son did." I walked back out to the living room. Vance was making coffee. He handed me a mug. "Start talking," Mac Vance said, sitting down opposite me. I told him everything. The yacht, the locked door, the heat, the escape through the bilge, the swim. Vance listened without interrupting. He was a lawyer now, but before that he was legal counsel for the JAG Corps. He knew how to build a case and he knew how to bury a body. "So he tried to cook you," Vance said, his voice low and dangerous. "That is premeditated. That is capital murder, Mac. We call the police now. We get the Coast Guard to secure the boat before he tampers with the evidence." "No," I said. Vance slammed his hand on the table. "Why the hell not? He tried to kill you. Because if we call the police now, it is my word against his," I said. "He will say I got drunk and locked myself in. He will say the generator failed. He will lawyer up. He will use my money to hire a defense team that will drag this out for years. And while we fight in court, he will be living in my house, driving my cars, spending my fortune." I leaned forward. The pain in my back flared, but I ignored it. I want him to think he won Vance. I want him to feel the money in his hands. I want him to stand at my funeral and give a eulogy. I want him to sign the insurance papers. Vance narrowed his eyes. "You want to catch him in the fraud. I want to catch him in everything I said. I want to watch him rot from the inside out. I need you to keep me dead, Vance. As far as the world is concerned, Marcus Holloway drowned at sea. You are the executor of my estate. You play along. You tell him the will is being processed. You let him think the kingdom is his." Vance looked at me for a long time. He saw the cold resolve in my eyes. He saw that the man who had walked out of the ocean wasn't the friend he knew. It was a soldier on a mission. "All right," Vance said quietly. "You are dead." He stood up and walked to the television in the corner. He turned it on. "It is already starting," he said. The screen flickered to the local news channel. Breaking news flashed across the bottom in urgent red letters. And there he was, Dante. He was standing on the dock at the marina. Police boats were visible in the background, their blue lights flashing. Chloe was standing next to him, holding a handkerchief to her dry eyes. Dante looked disheveled. He had mussed his hair up. He had unbuttoned his shirt. He looked distraught. "My father, he fell," Dante stammered into the microphone, his voice breaking perfectly. "We were out on the water, just trying to have a nice Father's Day. He had a few drinks. He went down to the cabin to sleep it off. When we checked on him, he was gone." The camera zoomed in on his face. "I think he must have gone up on deck for fresh air," Dante sobbed. He stumbled. "The railing, it is low. We searched for hours. We called his name, but the ocean, it is so big." He buried his face in Chloe's shoulder. She patted his back, looking at the camera with a mask of tragic grief. "Please," the reporter said, "if anyone has seen anything." "We just want him home," Chloe whispered. "We are praying for a miracle." I sat there in the cabin watching my son perform my death. It was a good performance. The public would eat it up. The grieving son, the tragic accident, the wealthy, eccentric old man who drank too much and fell into the sea. I felt a cold smile spread across my cracked lips. "Cry louder, son," I whispered to the screen. "Make it convincing." I turned to Vance. "Get me a laptop," I said, "and get me access to my server. I need to see what they are doing in my house." Vance nodded. He walked to his bag. I looked back at the screen. Dante was being led away by a police officer looking frail and broken. He thinks the story is over. He thinks the credits are rolling. He doesn't know that this is just the opening scene. The ghost has returned, Dante, and I am going to haunt you until you beg for the hell I just escaped. The oatmeal tasted like wet paper. It was lukewarm and flavorless, a gray sludge that Vance had prepared for me because my throat was still too raw to handle solid food. I sat in the corner of the safe house wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled of cedar and mothballs. The only light in the room came from the flickering screen of a small television set perched on a milk crate. It was casting long, dancing shadows against the log walls, turning the mounted deer heads into grotesque, silent observers. I swallowed a spoonful of the gruel, wincing as it slid past the burns in my esophagus. Every swallow was a reminder. Every breath that wheezed in my chest was a testament to the hell I had crawled out of. Vance was sitting by the window cleaning a handgun. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. We had served together long enough to know when silence was the only respectful language. He knew I was watching the news. He knew I was watching my own obituary being written in real time. The local news anchor, a young woman with too much hairspray and a practiced solemnity, looked into the camera. "Breaking news tonight in the search for missing logistics tycoon Marcus Holloway. The Coast Guard has expanded their search radius to 50 miles off the coast of Key West, but officials say hope is fading fast as we approach the 48-hour mark." The screen cut to footage from the marina. It was a circus. News vans, police cruisers, and onlookers pressing against the yellow tape. And there, in the center of the storm, were the stars of the show, Dante and Chloe. They stood on the dock, the Silver King bobbing gently in the background. My son was wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt, the top collar undone to show just the right amount of distress. His hair was messy. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. It was a good look. It was calculated. Dante stepped up to the microphones. He cleared his throat. I watched his hands. They were shaking. To the public, that looked like grief. To me, it looked like the tremors of a coward who knows he has crossed a line he can never uncross. "We just want him home," Dante croaked into the microphone, his voice cracking perfectly. "My father is a strong man. He served this country for 30 years. If anyone can survive out there, it is him. But the heat, the ocean." He paused, wiping a hand across his face. I should have watched him closer. I should have been there when he went down to the cabin. I blame myself. I will always blame myself. I sat in the dark safe house and felt a cold stone settle in my gut. He was blaming himself not because he failed to save me, but because he failed to make sure I was dead before he drove away. He was acting out the guilt of a murderer and selling it as the guilt of a negligent son. Then the camera panned to Chloe. She was the masterpiece of this performance. She was wearing black. A simple dress, modest, understated. But on her face, she wore a pair of oversized Gucci sunglasses. dark lenses that hid her eyes completely. She held Dante's arm, clinging to him like a vine choking a tree. She didn't speak. She just nodded when Dante spoke. She dabbed at her cheeks with a tissue. "Take off the glasses, Chloe," I whispered to the screen. "Let me see your eyes." But she wouldn't. I knew why. The eyes never lie. The mouth can smile, the voice can break, but the eyes are the window to the soul. And Chloe's soul was a cash register. If she took off those glasses, the cameras would see that her eyes were dry. They were calculating. They were bored. She was hiding the lack of tears behind $500 of Italian plastic. The reporter came back on screen. Authorities say the heat wave, which has claimed 3 lives in the county so far, is the biggest factor working against the survival of the 73-year-old veteran. Police are treating this as a tragic accident pending further investigation. I used the remote to mute the television. The silence rushed back into the room, heavy and suffocating. Vance looked up from his gun. "They are good, Mac," he said quietly. "They are selling it. They are buying time," I rasped. "They need a body or a certificate of presumed death. They can't cash the checks without paper." I pushed the bowl of oatmeal away. My appetite was gone, replaced by a hunger for something else. Information. "Pass me the laptop, Vance." He handed me a ruggedized laptop, the kind we used in the field. I opened it, and the blue glow illuminated my scarred face. My fingers were stiff, the tips burnt and raw, but I could still type. I could still hunt. I didn't need to be a hacker to get into Dante's life. I didn't need complex code or brute force algorithms. I just needed to be a father who paid the bills. Dante had never paid for his own phone plan. He had never paid for his own cloud storage. Since he was in college, he had been on my family plan. I paid the bill every month. I controlled the account. And because Dante was lazy and entitled, he used the same password for everything. The name of his first dog followed by his birth year. I logged into the provider portal. I navigated to the family sharing settings. I clicked on Dante's device. Access iCloud backup. The screen loaded slowly, the progress bar crawling across the screen. I watched it, feeling like a voyeur in my own tragedy. This was the digital soul of my son. His photos, his contacts, his messages. The folder opened. I scrolled past the photos of his avocado toast and his selfies at the gym. I scrolled past the emails from credit card companies warning him about late payments. I went straight to the messages. I wanted to see what they were saying when the cameras were off. I found a thread with Chloe. It was dated yesterday, just hours after they had left me to die. "Chloe, did you scrub the boat, Dante?" "Yes." I wiped the handle. No prints. Chloe, "Good. Stick to the script. You were driving. I was sunbathing." He went down for a nap. "Dante, I feel sick, Chloe. What if he suffered?" Chloe, "Don't be weak, Dante. He suffered for a few hours. We have suffered for years waiting for him to drop dead. Focus on the payout." I read the words again. "We have suffered for years. My generosity, my patience, my love. To them, it was suffering. To them, living in a house I paid for, driving cars I leased, was torture because they couldn't control the capital." I kept scrolling. I needed more. I needed the smoking gun that proved this wasn't just hatred, but a business transaction. I found a message thread from this morning. It was with a contact named Realtor Brenda. Chloe had sent a link to a listing. I clicked on it. It was a sprawling villa in Miami. Oceanfront, 8 bedrooms, $12 million. "Chloe, we want to put an offer in." Brenda, "It is a competitive market, Chloe. The sellers want proof of funds. Can you show liquidity?" Chloe, "We have a significant liquidity event happening this week. The funds will clear in 7 days. Can you hold it with a deposit, Brenda?" "How much of a deposit, Chloe?" "50,000. I can wire it tomorrow. The rest comes from the estate settlement. It is guaranteed." I stared at the screen. A significant liquidity event. That was me. I was the event. My death was the transaction that would clear the funds. They hadn't even waited for the Coast Guard to call off the search. They hadn't even waited for a memorial service. They were shopping for mansions while I was supposedly floating dead in the Atlantic. The timestamp on the message was 8:00 a.m. 2 hours before they went on television to cry about wanting me home. I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest, but it turned into a cough. It rattled my ribs. Vance looked over. "You find something." I turned the laptop around so he could see. They are buying a house, Vance, I whispered. $12 million. They are using my life insurance as a down payment. Vance read the messages. His face hardened into stone. He racked the slide on his handgun, a sharp metallic sound. That is conspiracy, he said. That is murder for hire without the hire. We take this to the police, Mac. This proves motive. No, I said, closing the laptop. Vance stood up. Mac, this is insanity. You have them. You have the texts. You have the boat. Let the law handle it. The law is too slow, I said. The law will arrest them, yes. They will get bail. They will hire lawyers. They will drag me through a trial for 2 years. They will say the texts were hypothetical. They will say they were just planning for the future. I stood up. My legs were shaky, but I forced them to hold my weight. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark woods. I don't want them in a cell, Vance. Not yet. A cell is too safe. A cell has a bed. A cell has meals. What do you want then? Vance asked. I want them to feel it, I said. I want them to feel the heat. I want them to think they won. I want them to move into that house. I want them to spend the money. I want them to climb so high that when I kick the ladder out, the fall shatters every bone in their bodies. I turned back to him. They called me a liquidity event, Vance. They reduced my life, my 30 years of service, my sweat and my blood to a bank transfer. I walked over to the table and picked up the bowl of cold oatmeal. I ate a spoonful. It tasted bitter now. It tasted like fuel. Keep watching the accounts, I said. Let the deposit go through. Let them wire the money for the villa. But that is your money, Vance said. No, I said. That is the bait. I looked at the TV screen where the news loop was playing again. Dante was wiping his eyes. Chloe was adjusting her sunglasses. They want a performance, I said. I will give them a performance. But the third act is going to have a twist they never saw coming. I lay back down on the cot. The pain in my back was a dull roar, but my mind was clear, crystal clear. Sleep well, Dante, I whispered into the dark. Dream of your mansion. Dream of your millions. Because when you wake up, the nightmare begins. And this time, I am the one locking the door. The safe house smelled of old pine and gun oil, a scent that usually brought me peace, but tonight it smelled like a crime scene. I sat at the rough-hewn kitchen table, the wood scarred by years of hunters cleaning their knives. My own wounds were bandaged, hidden under a flannel shirt Vance had lent me, but the pain was still there. It was a dull throb in my back where the galvanized steel had flayed me, a reminder that I was mortal. But the pain in my chest was different. It wasn't physical. It was the heavy, cold weight of a truth I had been denying for 3 days. Vance walked in from the back room carrying a banker's box filled with files. He looked tired. His eyes were rimmed with red and his tie was loosened. He dropped the box on the table. It landed with a heavy thud that rattled the coffee mugs. We have the financials, Mac, Vance said, pulling out a chair. It is worse than we thought. I looked at the box. How bad, Vance? Did he drain the operating accounts? He tried, Vance said, opening a folder. He made transfers, small ones at first. 5,000 here, 10,000 there. Crypto exchanges, NFT marketplaces, the usual gambling for the digital age. But the bank flagged them. Your fraud protection is military-grade, Mac. They froze the big transactions before they could clear. I nodded. I had set those protocols up years ago. I knew Dante was reckless, but I never thought he was malicious. Just stupid. So he is broke, I said. That is why he did it. He needed the inheritance to cover his debts. Vance shook his head. He pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. He slid it across the table toward me. It isn't just about debt, Mac. It is about leverage. Look at this. I picked up the document. The cover page read, Apex Life Insurance, policy number 894-221-X. I frowned. I didn't recognize the company. My estate planning was handled by a firm in New York. I had a standard policy sure enough to cover taxes and leave a legacy for charity. But this was different. I flipped the page. Insured Marcus Holloway. Beneficiary Dante Holloway. Policy value $5 million. I stared at the number. 5 million. I didn't authorize this, I said, my voice low. I haven't signed a new policy in 10 years. Look at the signature page, Vance said, pointing to the bottom line. I turned to the last page. There it was. My name. Marcus T. Holloway, written in blue ink. The loops of the M were wide, The slant of the H was sharp. It looked exactly like my signature. It was precise. It was confident. But it wasn't mine. I ran my thumb over the ink. It was a forgery. But it wasn't a clumsy forgery like the ones kids do on report cards. This was practiced. This was studied. Dante had spent hours, maybe days, copying the way I signed my name. He had practiced becoming me so he could sell me. Date of execution, I asked. March 15th, Vance said. 3 months ago. I closed my eyes. March 15th. I remembered that day. Dante had come over for dinner. He had been nice. He had asked about my health. He had asked if I had updated my will. I thought he was just being responsible. I thought he was finally growing up. He was casing the joint. He was planning the kill. But 5 million, I said, opening my eyes. That is a lot of money, Vance, but for a man with Dante's spending habits, it won't last 5 years. Why risk a murder charge for 5 years of comfort? Keep reading, Vance said, his voice grim. Clause 14b, the double indemnity provision. I flipped back to the middle of the document. I found the clause. The legal jargon was dense, designed to confuse the layman, but I had read enough contracts in the logistics business to parse the language. In the event that the insured's death is determined to be accidental, including but not limited to drowning, vehicular impact, or environmental exposure, the benefit amount shall be doubled. Doubled. $10 million. The room went silent. The only sound was the wind howling outside the cabin, shaking the window panes. I put the paper down. My hands were steady. Too steady. Environmental exposure, I whispered. Vance nodded. Like heat stroke Mac. Like getting locked in a cabin during a record-breaking heat wave. Or drowning after falling overboard. I looked at the wall, but I wasn't seeing the wood. I was seeing the yacht. I was seeing the layout. The remote location. The locked door. The cut power. It wasn't just a murder. It was a business transaction. If he had poisoned me in my sleep, it would have been natural causes or suspicious. The payout would be 5 million. If he had shot me, it would be an investigation. But an accident. A tragic accident on the high seas. An old man succumbing to the elements. That was the golden ticket. He didn't just want me dead, Vance, I said, my voice turning into a growl. He wanted me to suffer. He needed me to die in a specific way to trigger the multiplier. He cooked me in that boat because I was worth twice as much if I died sweating than if I died sleeping. That is why he took you out on the water, Vance said. That is why he waited for the heat wave. He was tracking the weather, Mac. He was waiting for the hottest day of the year to cash you in. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the death of hope. For 3 days I had held on to a tiny shred of doubt. Maybe he panicked. Maybe it was Chloe's idea and he just went along with it. But this required paperwork. This required planning. This required him to look me in the eye for 3 months knowing that I was walking around with a price tag on my head. He turned me into livestock, I said. He fattened me up and waited for the market price to peak. I stood up. I walked to the fireplace. The embers were dying, turning to ash. I felt like those embers. The fire of my love for my son was gone. All that was left was gray dust. Vance watched me carefully. We can take this to the DA, Mac, he said. This is fraud. This is motive. We nail him now. No, I said. Vance sighed. Mac, you are playing a dangerous game. If he finds out you are alive before we strike. He won't, I said. He is too arrogant. He thinks he is the smartest man in the room. He thinks he pulled off the perfect crime. I turned back to the table. I picked up the policy. $10 million. That is the number. That is the value of my life to him. I looked at Vance. Let him file the claim. Vance's eyes widened. What? Let him file the claim, I repeated. Let him submit the death certificate. Let him sign the affidavit swearing that I died by accident. Let him reach for that $10 million. But why, Vance asked. Because attempted murder is hard to prove without a body, I said. A good lawyer could argue he just forgot to unlock the door. That he panicked. He could get manslaughter. He could get 5 years and be out in 2. I slammed the policy down on the table. But insurance fraud on a $10 million policy, that is federal. That is wire fraud. That is 20 years minimum. And if he signs that claim while I am standing in the back of the room breathing, I smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes. It was the smile of a shark that has just smelled blood in the water. Then I own him, Vance. I own his freedom. I own his future. I own every breath he takes for the rest of his miserable life. Vance looked at the document, then back at me. He saw the shift. He saw the father die and the Master Chief take over. "You are going to let him dig his own grave," Vance whispered. "I am going to hand him the shovel," I said. I sat back down. I pulled the laptop toward me. "Is the funeral scheduled?" I asked. "Saturday," Vance said. "At the estate. He is calling it a celebration of life. He invited the board of directors. He invited the press." "Good," I said. "Saturday." I looked at the calendar on the screen. 3 days. 3 days for him to sweat. 3 days for him to spend money he doesn't have. 3 days for him to think he is the king of the world. I want you to call the insurance company, Vance. Use your back channels. Tell them to expedite the claim. Tell them the family is grieving and needs the funds immediately." Vance hesitated. "You want to help him get the money. I want him to see the money," I said. "I want him to smell it. I want him to believe it is real. Because the fall only hurts if you are standing on top of the mountain." I touched the bandage on my arm. The burn was healing, but the scar would be there forever. "He sold me for 10 million, I whispered. I closed the laptop. He is going to find out that I am priceless, and the cost of doing business with Marcus Holloway is higher than he can ever afford. "Get some sleep, Vance," I said. "We have a funeral to plan, and it isn't going to be mine." I sat in the dim light of the safe house with a laptop open in front of me, watching my own funeral on a 14-inch screen. It is a surreal experience to witness the world moving on without you. It is like being a ghost, but without the freedom of floating through walls. I was tethered to this wooden chair by the pain in my healing back and the cold fury in my gut. 7 days had passed since I washed ashore. 7 days of silence. The Coast Guard had officially called off the search at sundown yesterday. They declared me lost at sea, presumed dead. In the eyes of the law, Marcus Holloway was a statistic, a tragedy, a cautionary tale about old men and open water. But on the screen in front of me, the reality was much uglier. I had accessed the security server of my estate 2 hours ago. I installed those cameras myself years ago. High definition, night vision, audio enabled. I put them there to keep burglars out. I never imagined I would use them to watch my son invite the vultures in. The camera feed from the backyard showed a scene that looked less like a memorial and more like a coronation. The lawn was perfectly manicured, the grass cut in diagonal stripes just the way I liked it. But that was where the familiarity ended. Dante had spared no expense. There were white tents set up near the pool to shield the guests from the relentless Florida sun. The same sun that he had hoped would cook me alive was now being blocked by silk canopies for his friends. Waiters in white jackets moved through the crowd with silver trays. I zoomed in. Champagne. They were serving Dom Perignon at a memorial service. My stomach churned. Champagne. I was a beer man. Everyone knew that. If this was really about honoring me, they would be serving Miller High Life and barbecue. But this wasn't for me. This was for the image. I scanned the crowd. I recognized the faces. There was Johnson from the logistics board, looking solemn but checking his watch every 30 seconds. He was probably wondering how my death would affect the third quarter stock prices. There was Brenda the realtor, smiling a little too widely as she talked to a group of investors. She was probably already calculating her commission on the Miami villa Chloe was buying. And then there were the friends, or rather the people Dante called friends. Hangers-on, influencers, people who had never worked a day in their lives but knew how to dress for a party. They were drinking my wine, eating my shrimp, and laughing. I could hear them through the audio feed. "It is so sad," one woman said, adjusting her hat. "But at least he died doing what he loved." "I didn't love dying in a metal box," I whispered to the screen. Then the camera angle shifted as the back doors of the house opened. Dante and Chloe stepped out. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. Dante was wearing a black suit that cost more than my first car. He looked the part of the grieving heir. His head was bowed. He was holding a handkerchief. He walked with a heavy step, accepting condolences with a nod and a handshake. He was playing the role of the burdened son perfectly. He looked like he was carrying the weight of the world, but I knew he was just carrying the anticipation of the wire transfer. But it was Chloe who made my breath catch in my throat. She was wearing a black dress. It was tasteful, elegant, and clearly brand new. But it wasn't the dress that made my hands shake. It was the necklace. Around her neck, resting against her skin, was a diamond pendant surrounded by sapphires. It glittered in the sunlight, catching the light with a brilliance that cut through the pixelated video feed. I knew that necklace. I bought that necklace in 1985. It took me 3 years of saving my Navy pay. I ate canned beans and skipped shore leave to put away the money. I bought it for Beatrice on our 10th anniversary. She cried when I put it on her. She wore it to church every Sunday. She wore it to Dante's graduation. She was wearing it in the portrait that hung over the fireplace. When Beatrice died 10 years ago, I took that necklace off her neck before the undertaker came. I cleaned it. I wrapped it in velvet. I put it in the hidden safe in my bedroom wall. The safe that only I knew the combination to. Or so I thought. Chloe had found it. She had cracked the safe. She had gone into my sanctuary, rummaged through the memories of the woman I loved, and stolen the one thing that was sacred. She wasn't just wearing jewelry. She was wearing my heart. And she was parading it around a party paid for with my murder. I watched as she touched the necklace absently while talking to the insurance adjuster. She laughed at something he said, a light tinkling laugh. Then she touched the diamonds again as if to reassure herself that they were real, that she was rich, that she had won. "You crossed the line, Chloe," I growled, my voice echoing in the empty cabin. "You crossed the line and you burned the bridge." Vance walked up behind me. He placed a hand on my shoulder. He saw the screen. He saw the necklace. "That is Beatrice's piece, isn't it?" he asked quietly. I nodded. I couldn't speak. The rage was too thick. "That is theft," Mac Vance said. "We can add it to the list." "It is desecration," I said. "She is wearing a tombstone around her neck." I watched as the ceremony began. Dante walked up to a podium set up near the deep end of the pool. He tapped the microphone. The feedback squeal made the guests wince. "Thank you all for coming," Dante said, his voice trembling with practiced emotion. "We are here to celebrate the life of Marcus Holloway, my father, a hero, a titan of industry." He paused to wipe a fake tear. "My father was a man of few words," Dante continued. "He was tough. He was hard on me sometimes. But I know he loved me, and I know he would want us to move forward. He wouldn't want us to mourn. He would want us to live, to build, to secure the legacy he left behind. Secure the legacy. That was code for cash the check. I listened to him lie. I listened to him rewrite history. He talked about fishing trips we never took. He talked about advice I never gave. He painted a picture of a close, loving relationship that never existed. He was building a myth to justify the inheritance. And the crowd ate it up. They nodded. They murmured. They saw a grieving son. I saw a predator in a suit. Then the insurance adjuster stepped forward. He was a short man with a briefcase. He shook Dante's hand vigorously. I saw him hand Dante a folder. I knew what was in that folder. The expedited claim forms. The affidavit of accidental death. Dante took the folder. He held it like it was a holy relic. He didn't open it. He just clutched it to his chest. Chloe moved to his side. She put her arm around him. She whispered something in his ear. I turned up the volume on the feed, but the ambient noise was too loud. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read her lips. "Sign it tonight," she mouthed. I leaned back in my chair. They were so confident. They thought the game was over. They thought the referee had blown the whistle and they were just waiting for the trophy presentation. I looked at Vance. "Is the uniform ready?" I asked. Vance nodded. "It is in the bedroom. I had it dry cleaned. I polished the brass myself. I stood up. My legs were stiff, but the weakness was gone. The oatmeal and the rest had done their work. The adrenaline was doing the rest. I walked to the bedroom. Hanging on the door was my dress blues. The Navy uniform I hadn't worn in 15 years. The gold stripes on the sleeve, the ribbons on the chest, the anchors on the lapels. It wasn't just clothing, it was armor. I took off the flannel shirt Vance had lent me. I looked at the bandages on my torso. They were clean white strips covering the damage. I put on the trousers. They were a little loose around the waist now. I had lost weight in the heat trap. I tightened the belt. I put on the shirt. I buttoned it slowly. One button for discipline. One button for duty. One button for honor. I tied the tie. A perfect knot. Muscle memory took over. My hands knew what to do even if they were scarred. I put on the jacket. The weight of it felt good. It felt familiar. It straightened my spine. I looked in the mirror. The man looking back wasn't the victim from the yacht. He wasn't the old man who needed a nap. He was the Master Chief. I put on my cover, the white hat sitting perfectly level on my head. I picked up my cane. It was a simple black stick with a silver handle. I didn't need it to walk anymore. But it was a prop. It was part of the theater. I walked back out to the main room. Vance was waiting. He looked me up and down. He smiled a grim, tight smile. "You look like you are about to court-martial someone, Mac," he said. "I am," I said. I looked at the screen one last time. Dante was raising a glass of champagne. Chloe was laughing her hand on the stolen necklace. "Enjoy the drink, son," I whispered. "It is the last expensive thing you will ever taste." Vance grabbed his keys. "The car is ready, Mac. It is a 40-minute drive to the estate. Let's go," I said. We walked out of the cabin into the blinding afternoon sun. I wasn't dead. I wasn't lost. I was coming home. And I was bringing the storm with me. The drive to my own funeral was quiet. Vance drove the black SUV with the steady hands of a man who was used to transporting high-value targets, not resurrected ghosts. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the familiar oak trees that lined the road to my estate. I had planted those trees 30 years ago. I had watered them. I had watched them grow strong and tall. And just like my son, they had grown deep roots in soil that I owned, but today they looked different. Today they looked like sentinels guarding a crime scene. We turned onto the main driveway. The gate was open. Of course it was open. Dante wanted the world to come in. He wanted the press. He wanted the board of directors. He wanted witnesses to his grief, so that when the insurance check cleared, nobody would ask questions. I saw the cars parked on the lawn. Bentleys, Mercedes, Teslas. It was a parking lot of vultures. Vance slowed down as we approached the main house. The security guard, a young man I had hired last year, stepped out to stop us. He raised his hand. I rolled down the window. The guard looked at me. His eyes went wide. His jaw actually dropped. He stumbled back, dropping his clipboard. "Mr. Holloway," he stammered. "But," they said. "Open the barrier, son," I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice of the man who signed his paychecks. He didn't argue. He scrambled to the control box and the iron gate swung open. We rolled through. Up ahead I could see the gathering in the backyard. It was elaborate. White tents fluttered in the breeze. A string quartet was playing something mournful and expensive. A large portrait of me stood on an easel near the pool. It was a photo from 10 years ago when I still had hope for Dante. In the picture I was smiling. I wasn't smiling now. Vance stopped the car right at the edge of the patio. The tires crunched loudly on the gravel. It was an intrusive sound, a violent mechanical noise that cut through the soft weeping of the violins. Heads turned. People frowned. They were annoyed that someone would drive so close to the ceremony. They expected a caterer or a late arrival. They did not expect the dead man. I opened the door. I stepped out. I was wearing my dress blues. The fabric was crisp and dark, contrasting sharply with the white linen suits of the guests. The gold stripes on my sleeve caught the afternoon sun. The ribbons on my chest, a colorful map of campaigns and conflicts, told a story of survival that these soft people could never understand. I adjusted my cover, making sure the white hat was perfectly level. I gripped my cane. The silver handle felt cold and solid in my hand. I didn't say a word. I just stood there. The silence began at the back of the crowd and rolled forward like a wave. The murmuring stopped. The clinking of glasses stopped. Even the string quartet trailed off into a discordant squeak as the cellist saw me. One by one they turned. They looked. They gasped. It was absolute stillness. The kind of silence you hear after a bomb goes off before the screaming starts. I scanned the faces. I saw Johnson from the board, his mouth hanging open, a canapé halfway to his lips. I saw Brenda, the realtor, her eyes popping out of her head. And then I saw them. Dante was on the stage. He was standing at the podium clutching a crumpled piece of paper. He had been in the middle of a sentence, something about my enduring spirit. He froze. His face went the color of old ash. He gripped the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. He wasn't looking at a father. He was looking at a reckoning. And Chloe, she was standing in the front row. She was holding a crystal flute of champagne. She was wearing my wife's necklace, the diamonds glittering around her throat like a stolen constellation. She saw me. Her eyes locked onto mine behind her sunglasses. I saw her hand tremble. It started as a small shake, then became a violent tremor. The glass slipped from her fingers. It hit the slate patio with a sound that cracked the air like a gunshot. Shatter. The champagne splashed onto her expensive black dress. She didn't move. She didn't look down. She just stared at me, her mouth forming a silent word. Ghost. I started to walk. Click, step, click, step. The sound of my cane on the stone was the only thing in the world. The crowd parted. They scrambled out of my way, knocking over chairs, spilling drinks. They looked at me with a mixture of terror and awe. I was gaunt. My face was peeling from the sunburn. My eyes were red-rimmed and sunken. I looked like I had crawled out of a grave because in a way I had. I walked straight down the center aisle. I didn't look left or right. I kept my eyes fixed on the stage, fixed on the son who had locked me in an oven. Dante tried to speak. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air on a dock. He took a step back, knocking into the microphone stand. The feedback squealed a high, piercing shriek that made everyone flinch. I reached the steps of the stage. I climbed them slowly. 1, 2, 3. I stood next to him. He smelled of fear. It is a distinct scent, sour and metallic underneath the expensive cologne. He was shaking so hard the podium was vibrating. "Dad," he whispered. It was barely a breath. "Dad." I thought. I looked at him. I looked deep into his eyes. I saw the panic. I saw the guilt. I saw the calculation trying to reboot in his brain, trying to find a lie that could explain this. I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder. He flinched as if I were burning hot. He expected me to hit him. He expected me to scream. But I didn't. I smiled. It was the smile of a wolf looking at a lamb that has wandered into the den. I leaned into the microphone. My voice was raspy, damaged by the salt and the heat, but it was loud. It boomed across the yard, echoing off the walls of the house I had paid for. "I apologize for the interruption, everyone," I said. The crowd stared. Nobody breathed. I turned to Dante. I kept my hand on his shoulder, squeezing just hard enough to let him know that I was solid, that I was real, that I wasn't going anywhere. I patted his shoulder gently. "Shin loi kontrai," I said, keeping my tone conversational, almost pleasant. "Bo boy hoi cham." Dante's knees buckled. He grabbed the podium to stay upright. I leaned closer to him so that only the microphone could hear the venom in my whisper. "Lan sao nyo neo tau ganbo honya." The words hung in the air. Simple. Devastating. "Next time anchor closer to the shore." It was a joke to the crowd, a survivor's quip, a bit of dark humor from an old sailor. But to Dante it was a death sentence. It was confirmation. He knew that I knew. He looked at me, his eyes wide with terror. He realized in that moment that I hadn't just survived. I had remembered. The color drained from his face completely. He made a small choking sound. Then he looked out at the crowd. He looked for Chloe. Chloe was gone. She had vanished from the front row, leaving only a puddle of champagne and broken glass. I took the microphone from the stand. "Please," I said, addressing the stunned guests. "Don't let me stop the party. I believe there is an open bar, and I believe my son was just telling you all about my legacy." I handed the microphone to Dante. "Go on, son," I said. "Finish your speech. Tell them how much you miss me." Dante took the microphone. His hands were shaking so bad he almost dropped it. He looked at the crowd. He looked at me. I stood there in my dress blues, leaning on my cane, waiting. He couldn't do it. He couldn't speak. The lie had died the moment I walked through the gate. He dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a thud. He ran. He ran off the stage, pushing past the insurance adjuster, tripping over a cable. He ran toward the house, looking for a place to hide, looking for Chloe, looking for an exit that didn't exist. I watched him go. I turned back to the crowd. "It seems my son is overcome with emotion," I said calmly. I looked at the insurance adjuster who was standing there clutching the $10 million check. I walked over to him. "I believe that belongs to me," I said, pointing to the folder. The man handed it to me, his hands trembling. "Mr. Holloway, we were told. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated," I said. I took the folder. I opened it. I looked at the claim form signed by Dante. I looked at the affidavit of accidental death. Evidence. I closed the folder and tucked it under my arm. I looked at the guests. "The bar is closed," I said. "Get off my lawn." I turned and walked toward the house, following the trail of my son's fear. The dead man was walking, and the funeral was just beginning. The silence that had fallen over my estate didn't last long. It shattered like a dropped mirror. The shock wave of my reappearance broke the spell, and suddenly the air was filled with a chaotic hum of whispers and gasps. The guests, the vultures in linen and silk who had come to drink my champagne and toast to my memory, began to retreat. They backed away from me as if I were radioactive. They looked at my dress blues. They looked at the scars on my face that the makeup couldn't quite hide. They looked at the cane in my hand, which I held not for support, but like a weapon. Dante was still standing near the podium. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the belt. His face was devoid of color, a mask of gray ash and sweat. He opened his mouth and closed it again. He was trying to find the script. He was trying to remember the lines he and Chloe had rehearsed for this moment, but there were no lines for this. There was no contingency plan for the victim walking back into the crime scene. "Dad," he stammered, his voice pitching high and thin. "Dad, I can't believe it." He stumbled down the steps of the stage, almost tripping over his own expensive shoes. He walked toward me, but he stopped 5 feet away. He was afraid to touch me. He was afraid that if he reached out, his hand would pass right through me, or worse, that I would grab him and drag him down to hell. "We thought you were gone," Dante choked out. Tears were streaming down his face now, but they were tears of terror, not relief. "We searched everywhere. I took the boat in circles for hours. I screamed your name until my throat bled. I thought you fell overboard. I thought I lost you." He was lying. It was a clumsy, desperate lie. He was trying to rewrite history in real time, hoping that if he said it loud enough, it would become true. I watched him sweat. I watched his eyes dart toward the gate, checking for an exit. I looked at him with the cold, detached stare of a drill instructor watching a recruit fail. "You didn't look everywhere, son." I said, my voice low enough that only he could hear. "You didn't look in the bilge." Dante flinched. His eyes went wide. He knew. In that second, he knew that I remembered everything: the lock, the heat, the darkness. Before he could collapse completely, movement caught my eye. Chloe. She was faster than him. She was sharper. She realized that Dante was drowning, and if she didn't act fast, she would go down with him. She stepped over the puddle of champagne and broken glass. She didn't run away. She ran toward me. She put on a performance that would have won an Academy Award. She threw her hands over her mouth. She let out a sob of pure theatrical joy. "Oh my God," she screamed. "Oh, thank Jesus. It is a miracle." She launched herself at me. She threw her arms around my neck, burying her face in the shoulder of my uniform. "Marcus," she sobbed loud enough for the cameras and the police to hear. "You are alive. We prayed for this. We prayed every single night." I stood there stiff as a board. I didn't hug her back. I let her cling to me. I felt her body trembling against mine. It wasn't the tremble of relief. It was the vibration of a coiled snake. She smelled of expensive perfume and fear. But underneath that, underneath the floral scent, I smelled something else. I smelled the greed. I smelled the rot. I leaned my head down. I brought my lips close to her ear. I moved the microphone away so nobody else could hear. "Get off me, Chloe," I whispered, my voice like grinding gravel. She stiffened, but she didn't let go. She couldn't. She had to sell the scene. "I can smell it on you," I whispered. "Smell what?" She hissed back into my collar, her voice tight with panic. "The insurance money," I said. "I smell the $10 million you were already spending. I smell the Miami villa. I smell the betrayal." She pulled back then. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide and terrified behind the tears. She saw the monster in my eyes. She saw the man who had crawled through a ventilation duct to come back and haunt her. She stepped back, wiping her face. She looked at the crowd. "He is in shock," she announced, her voice shaking. "He is confused. We need to get him inside. We need a doctor." That was the cue for the police. 2 officers who had been standing at the perimeter ostensibly for security during the high-profile funeral walked over. One of them was a sergeant I recognized. Miller. Good man. Honest. "Mr. Holloway," Miller said, tipping his cap. "This is... well, sir, I have never seen anything like this. We had you listed as a recovery mission, not a rescue." I looked at Miller. Then I looked at Dante and Chloe. They were holding their breath. They were waiting for the accusation. They were waiting for me to point a finger and say, "They did it. They locked me in. Arrest them." If I did that, the game would be over. They would be arrested. They would make bail. They would hire lawyers. They would drag this out for years. They would claim I was senile. They would claim it was an accident. No, that was too easy. I wanted to destroy them. And to destroy them, I needed them to think they were safe. I needed them to think they had gotten away with it. I needed to feed them enough rope to hang themselves. I looked at Miller and put on a weary smile. I slumped my shoulders slightly, playing the part of the tired old veteran. It was my own fault, Sergeant, I said. Dante's head snapped up. Chloe froze. Your fault, Sir Miller asked, taking out his notebook. Yes, I said, sighing heavily. I am an old fool, Miller. I drank too much. Far too much. I went out on the deck for some air. I must have stumbled. The next thing I knew, I was in the water. I paused. I looked at Dante. I saw the color returning to his cheeks. I saw the hope sparking in his eyes. I floated for a long time. I continued spinning the lie. I washed up on a small island, uninhabited. I hit my head. I was confused. I didn't know who I was for a few days, just wandering around eating coconuts and trying to remember my name. It was a ridiculous story. It was the kind of story a bad writer would invent, but it was exactly what the police wanted to hear because it closed the case without paperwork. And it was exactly what Dante and Chloe wanted to hear because it meant they weren't going to prison today. Amnesia Miller asked, writing it down. Temporary, I said, tapping my temple. The memories came back this morning. I walked to a highway. I flagged down a ride. And here I am, just in time to hear my own eulogy. Miller chuckled, closing his notebook. Well, sir, I am glad you are back. You gave your family a scare. He looked at Dante. You are a lucky man, son. Not many people get a second chance with their father. Dante nodded vigorously. Yes. Yes, I am. Thank God. It was just an accident. Like I said. He looked at me with gratitude. He thought I was covering for him because I loved him. He thought I was senile and actually believed the lie. He thought he had won the lottery. He didn't realize I was just closing the cage door. I looked at the crowd. The show is over, I said, my voice booming again. Go home, take your champagne and your sympathy and get off my property. I didn't wait for them to leave. I turned and walked toward the house. Dante and Chloe scrambled to follow me. They were like puppies now, eager to please, eager to keep the narrative alive. Dad, let me help you, Dante said, reaching for my arm. Don't touch me, I snapped. He recoiled. I walked up the steps to the back porch. I opened the door to the kitchen. It smelled of catering food and lilies, the smell of a funeral. I walked into the living room. I looked around. They had moved things. My favorite chair was in the corner. A new painting was on the wall. They had already started redecorating. I turned to face them. Dante and Chloe stood in the doorway. They looked exhausted. They looked terrified. But mostly they looked confused. Dad, Dante started, his voice shaking. We are so sorry. We didn't know. If we had known you were alive. Save it, Dante, I said, leaning on my cane. I walked over to the mantel. I picked up the urn that was sitting there. A heavy brass urn. What is this? I asked. That is for you, Chloe whispered. We were going to put a memorial plaque in the garden, since we didn't have a body. I weighed the urn in my hand. It was empty, just like their souls. I tossed it to Dante. He caught it fumbling against his chest. You can keep that, I said. You might need it later. I looked at Chloe. I looked at the necklace. That is a beautiful piece of jewelry, Chloe, I said. She flinched, touching her throat. Oh, this. I just wanted to feel close to you, Marcus. And Beatrice. I found it in the safe. I hope you don't mind. Take it off, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was absolute. She froze. But Marcus, take it off. She fumbled with the clasp, her long manicured nails struggling. She unhooked it. She handed it to me. I took it. I put it in my pocket. I looked at them. I am tired, I said. I am going to my room. I want this house empty of guests in 10 minutes. And I want the two of you to sleep in the guest house tonight, the guest house, Dante asked. But this is our home. Not tonight, it isn't, I said. Tonight I want silence. I walked toward the stairs, but Marcus, Chloe called out, her voice edging on desperation. What happens now? Are we okay? I stopped on the first step. I looked back down at them. They looked so pathetic, so small. I smiled that same wolfish smile. We are family. Chloe, I said. Family sticks together, right? I didn't wait for an answer. I climbed the stairs, listening to the tap of my cane. I heard them exhaling below. I heard them whispering. They were relieving the pressure. They thought the storm had passed. They didn't know that I was the storm. And I had only just made landfall. The last of the luxury cars crunched down the gravel driveway, leaving a cloud of dust that hung in the humid Florida air like a dirty curtain. I stood on the porch of the estate I had paid for with 30 years of sweat and blood and watched the taillights of the mourners fade into the distance. The vultures had been fed their drama, and now they were retreating to their air-conditioned nests, leaving me alone with the 2 rats I had trapped in my kitchen. The house was quiet now. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed against the eardrums. I walked back inside, locking the heavy oak front door with a deliberate click. I didn't use the keypad. I used the deadbolt. I wanted them to hear the sound of the lock engaging. I wanted that sound to trigger the muscle memory of the yacht, the memory of the steel bar dropping into place and sealing their fate. Dante and Chloe were sitting in the living room. They looked like refugees in their own home. Dante had loosened his tie, his face slick with sweat. Chloe was fanning herself with a funeral program, her makeup starting to run in the heat. I walked past them without a word. I went to the hallway thermostat. It was a high-tech system connected to the smart home network I had installed years ago. I punched in the override code, the one only I knew. I watched the digital display flicker. 72 degrees. I spun the dial. 85, 90, 95. I heard the hum of the central air conditioning unit sputter and die. The silence that followed was instant and oppressive. Dad Dante called out, his voice trembling. "What are you doing?" The AC just turned off. I walked back into the living room, leaning on my cane. "It is broken," I said. My voice was calm, flat. "Just like the generator on the boat, son. Things break, especially when you push them too hard." "But it is 90 degrees outside," Chloe snapped, standing up. "We can't stay in here without air. It is dangerous." "Dangerous," I repeated. I looked at her. I looked at the sweat beading on her upper lip. "Yes, Chloe. Heat is very dangerous. It creeps up on you. It dries out your lungs. It cooks your brain. But we are family, right? We survive together." I walked to the windows. They were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the ocean. I pulled the heavy velvet drapes shut, blocking out the light, blocking out the view. "We need to keep the sun out," I said. "It turns the house into an oven." I moved from window to window, closing them, locking them. I took the keys to the window locks and slipped them into my pocket. Dante watched me with wide, terrified eyes. He knew. Deep down in his lizard brain, he knew exactly what I was doing. I was recreating the box. I was turning my sprawling mansion into the cabin of the Silver King. I went to the kitchen. It was dinner time. A normal family would have ordered takeout. A normal family would have had salads or cold sandwiches in this heat. But we were not a normal family. I opened the pantry. I pulled out the biggest pot I owned, a cast-iron Dutch oven. I filled it with water and set it on the stove. I turned all 6 burners on high. The blue flames roared to life, adding their heat to the already stifling room. "What are you cooking?" Dante asked, coming into the kitchen, wiping his forehead with his sleeve. "Gumbo," I said, chopping onions with a rhythmic thud. "Spicy seafood gumbo. My grandmother's recipe. It needs to boil for 3 hours. "Boiling soup," Chloe said, incredulous. "Marcus, are you insane? It is a sauna in here. We need ice water. We need salads." I ignored her. I threw in the peppers. I threw in the sausage. I threw in the cayenne pepper. The steam began to rise, filling the kitchen with a heavy, spicy fog that clung to the skin and burned the eyes. I cooked with the intensity of a man possessed. I didn't turn on the exhaust fan. I let the heat build. I let the humidity rise until the kitchen windows fogged over. "Sit down," I commanded, pointing to the table. They sat. They didn't dare disobey. They were terrified of the ghost at the head of the table. I ladled the boiling red stew into bowls. I placed them in front of them. The steam hit their faces, making them recoil. "Eat," I said. "Dad." "I can't," Dante whispered. "I feel sick." "Eat," I roared, slamming my hand on the table. "You wanted a meal with your father. You wanted to spend time together. We are spending time together." I took a spoonful of the scalding liquid and put it in my mouth. I didn't flinch. I let it burn. It was nothing compared to the fire inside me. They ate. They forced the hot, spicy soup down their throats, tears streaming from their eyes as the heat compounded the heat in the room. Sweat ran down Dante's face, dripping off his chin into the bowl. Chloe's expensive blouse was soaked through, sticking to her skin. "It is hot, isn't it?" I asked softly, watching them suffer. "It feels like the air is running out. It feels like the walls are closing in." Dante dropped his spoon. It clattered loudly. "Stop it!" he cried, pushing his chair back. "Stop it, Dad. I know what you are doing." "What am I doing, son?" I asked, blinking innocently. You are punishing us," Dante stammered. "The heat, the windows. You are trying to make us feel what I asked," leaning forward. "Trapped, helpless, like you are dying in a box and no one is coming to save you." Dante couldn't breathe. He was hyperventilating. The panic attack was real this time. I have to go," he gasped. "I need air." He ran to the back door. He grabbed the handle. Locked. He rattled it frantically. Dad opened the door. I sat there eating my gumbo. "The key is in the study," I said. "Or maybe it is in the garage. I can't remember. My memory, you know. It comes and goes." Dante sank to the floor, sobbing. He curled into a ball, the heat breaking him just like it had almost broken me. Chloe stood up. She wasn't crying. She was furious. She looked at Dante with disgust. Then she looked at me with hatred. "You are a sick old man," she hissed. I smiled. "And you are sweating, Chloe. It ruins the makeup." The night was worse. I didn't let them leave. I told them the alarm system was malfunctioning and if they opened a door, the police would come. And given the fraud investigation I mentioned at the funeral, they were terrified of the police. I sent them to their room, the master suite on the second floor. I had disabled the thermostat in that zone too. Heat rises. The second floor was 10 degrees hotter than the kitchen. I stayed downstairs in my study where I had a hidden portable AC unit running. I watched them on the monitors. Dante couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned on the Egyptian cotton sheets, kicking them off, then pulling them back on. He was delirious. He was muttering in his sleep. I turned up the volume on the monitor. "The door," he mumbled. "Open the door. It is so hot. Dad, I am sorry." He was dreaming of the yacht. He was dreaming of my death. Chloe was awake. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. She wasn't sweating. She was planning. She watched Dante thrash in his nightmare. She didn't comfort him. She looked at him like he was a broken tool that she needed to discard. She stood up and walked to the bathroom. She splashed water on her face. She looked at herself in the mirror. I zoomed the camera in. I saw her lips move. "He knows," she whispered to her reflection. She walked back into the bedroom. She sat down next to Dante and shook him awake. "Dante, wake up," she hissed. Dante sat up, gasping. "Is he here? Is he watching?" "Shut up," Chloe snapped, slapping his arm. "Pull yourself together. He is playing games, Dante. He is trying to break us. He knows." Chloe. Dante wept. "He knows about the lock. He knows about the AC. Did you hear him at dinner? He is torturing us. We have to leave. We have to run." "We can't run," Chloe said, grabbing his face and forcing him to look at her. "We have no money. The accounts are frozen, remember? If we run, we look guilty. We lose the house, we lose the insurance, we lose everything. We already lost." Dante cried. "He is going to turn us in." "No, he isn't," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a sinister whisper. "If he was going to turn us in, he would have done it at the funeral. He would have done it when the police were here." "Then why is he doing this?" Dante asked. "Because he is senile," Chloe lied. She smoothed Dante's hair back. "Listen to me, baby. He is old. He suffered a trauma. His brain is firing wrong. He remembers bits and pieces, but he is confused. That is why he is acting out. He is like a child having a tantrum." Dante looked at her, wanting to believe. "You think so?" "I know so," Chloe said. "But we can't live like this. He is dangerous, Dante. Look at this heat. He locked us in. He is a danger to himself and to us." "So what do we do?" Dante asked. Chloe reached into her purse, which was sitting on the nightstand. She pulled out a small orange pill bottle. "I found these in his bathroom," she said. "His heart medication. Digitalis. I watched on the monitor. My blood ran cold. Those weren't my pills. I didn't take heart medication. Those were pills she must have bought or stolen." "What about them?" Dante asked. "If he has another episode," Chloe whispered. "If his heart gives out, This time for real. Nobody would question it. He is old. He just survived a shipwreck. The stress, the heat. It would be natural. Dante pulled away. No. No, Chloe. We can't. We tried that. It failed. I can't do it again. We have to. She said, her eyes burning with intensity. It is him or us, Dante. He is going to cut you out of the will. He is going to leave us destitute. Do you want to work at a gas station for the rest of your life? Do you want to lose me? Dante stared at the bottle. Just a little extra, Chloe said, shaking the pills, in his coffee. Tomorrow morning. He drinks it black. He won't taste a thing. Dante hesitated. I saw the war in his eyes. The fear of me versus the fear of poverty. Okay, he whispered. Okay. Good boy, she said, kissing his forehead. Now go back to sleep. I will handle the morning. I turned off the monitor. I sat in the cool air of my study, my hand resting on the cane. They were going to try again. They hadn't learned a thing. They thought I was trapped in here with them. They didn't realize that I wasn't the prey. I was the exterminator. And tomorrow morning breakfast was going to be served with a side of justice. The morning sun beat down on the asphalt of the marina parking lot with the same relentless intensity that had nearly killed me 4 days ago. I sat in the back of my black SUV, the tinted windows shielding me from the glare, watching my son Dante pace back and forth on the dock. He looked like a man standing on a trapdoor waiting for the lever to be pulled. He was wearing sunglasses to hide his bloodshot eyes and a baseball cap pulled low to hide his identity, but there is no hiding the posture of a guilty man. He checked his phone every 30 seconds. He wiped his palms on his pants. He looked at the water with a mixture of longing and terror. Earlier that morning I had listened from my study as Chloe drilled him on the plan. Her voice had been a hiss of desperation cutting through the thin walls of the guest room where I had confined them. She told him the yacht was a loose end. She told him the lock on the cabin door, the steel bar he had installed, was physical evidence of attempted murder. She told him that if the police inspected the Silver King, they would find the modifications. They would find the scratch marks where I had tried to pry the door open. They would find the truth. So she sent him to get rid of it. She told him to sell it to a chop shop she knew in Miami, or take it out to deep water and scuttle it. Just make it disappear, Dante, she had screamed. Sink it if you have to. Just get that metal box off the face of the earth. Dante was terrified. He argued that the boat wasn't his to sell. He argued that he had rented it under the table using a fake ID and my credit rating as a guarantor. But Chloe didn't care about logistics. She cared about survival. She pushed him out the door with a desperate kiss and a threat. Come back without the boat or don't come back at all. So here he was, standing on the dock next to the Silver King, the vessel that was supposed to be my coffin. I watched him step onto the deck. He moved skittishly, looking over his shoulder. He fumbled with the keys. He was trying to start the engines. He wanted to take it out. He wanted to drive it into the Atlantic and pull the plugs, but the engines didn't start. I pressed the remote kill switch on the tablet in my lap. I watched Dante panic. He turned the key again. Nothing. He slammed his hand against the console. He ran to the stern and checked the fuel lines. He was sweating profusely now, the back of his shirt turning dark. Then a man walked down the dock. It was Sal, the manager of the marina. Sal was a big man with forearms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He walked with a heavy purpose. He wasn't smiling. I cracked my window just an inch to hear the conversation. The wind carried their voices over the water. Hey, Sal shouted. Get off the boat. Dante jumped. He spun around, nearly tripping over a cleat. I am just checking the engines, he stammered. It won't start. I need to take it out for a run. You aren't taking it anywhere, Sal said, crossing his arms. The lease is up, and the payment is overdue. Dante forced a laugh. It was a brittle sound. Come on, Sal. You know me. I am Marcus Holloway's son. My dad is good for it. I just need to move the boat to a different slip, just for maintenance. Sal shook his head. No can do, kid. The owner put a freeze on the asset. The owner, Dante asked, confused. What are you talking about? Liquid Blue Charters owns this tub. I rented it from them. Sal smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who knows something you don't. Liquid Blue Charters got bought out, Sal said. Last week. Hostile takeover. The new management is very strict about unauthorized usage, especially by people who use forged signatures to sign the rental agreement. Dante turned pale. What do you mean forged? My dad signed that. Did he? Sal asked, taking a step closer. Because the new owner seems to think otherwise. And the new owner is on his way down here right now to discuss the terms of your surrender. Dante looked at the parking lot. He saw my SUV. He froze. I opened the door. I stepped out into the heat. I wasn't wearing my uniform today. I was wearing a suit. A charcoal gray suit tailored to perfection. I held my cane in my left hand. I walked down the wooden planks of the dock, the sound of my dress shoes echoing rhythmically. Clack, clack, clack. Dante backed up until his legs hit the railing of the boat. He was trapped between the man he tried to kill and the deep blue sea. "Dad," he whispered. I walked past Sal, giving him a nod. "Good work, Sal." "Thank you, Mr. Holloway," Sal said, stepping aside. "The asset is secured." I stopped in front of Dante. I looked at the boat. I looked at the white fiberglass hull that had baked in the sun. I looked at the tinted windows of the cabin where I had hallucinated my dead wife. "Nice boat, son," I said. "A little small for my taste, but it has good bones." "Dad, what is going on?" Dante asked, his voice rising in hysteria. Sal said the company was sold. He said the new owner. I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a folded document. "I bought Liquid Blue Charters, Dante," I said calmly. Dante blinked. You bought the rental company." "Last Tuesday," I said, "while I was recovering in the safe house. While you were planning my funeral, I was liquidating some assets. I bought the holding company that owns this marina and the charter service that owns this yacht." I stepped onto the boat. The deck shifted slightly under my weight. "I own the Silver King, Dante. I own the hull. I own the engines. And most importantly, I own the trap you built." Dante shook his head, backing away. No, that is impossible. You were missing. You were dead." "I was busy," I corrected. I walked to the cabin door, the door that had been locked. I pointed to the handle with my cane. "You see that lock, son?" I asked. Dante didn't answer. He was hyperventilating. "That is a custom modification," I said. "A steel drop bar. Installed from the outside. You can't buy that at a marine supply store. You have to order it. You have to install it yourself." I turned to face him. I had Sal check the maintenance logs. "There is no record of that lock being installed by the charter company. That means the renter installed it. That means you installed it, Dante." Dante held up his hands. "Dad, please. It was for security, to keep pirates out." "Pirates?" I laughed. A cold, sharp bark. "In Florida. You installed a lock that can only be operated from the outside to protect me from pirates." I walked closer to him. "You installed it to keep me in," I said. "You turned this boat into an oven, and now you are here to sell it, to destroy the evidence." Dante broke. He fell to his knees on the deck. "It was Chloe," he sobbed, grabbing my pant leg. "It was her idea. She said we needed the money. She said you were never going to die. She said you were too stubborn. She made me do it, Dad. She made me install the lock." I looked down at him. He was pathetic. A grown man blaming his wife for his own attempt at patricide. "She didn't make you do anything, Dante," I said. "She handed you a gun, and you pulled the trigger. You are just upset because the bullet missed." I reached into my pocket again. I pulled out a tablet. "But here is the real twist, Dante," I said, tapping the screen. I held it up so he could see. On the screen was a video. It was grainy black and white footage. It showed the deck of the Silver King. It showed Dante standing by the cabin door. It showed him sliding the steel bolt into place. It showed him pausing, listening to me banging on the inside. And then it showed him walking away. Dante stared at the screen. Where did you get that?" he whispered. I tapped the side of the boat. "This is a luxury yacht, Dante," I said. "It comes equipped with a security system. Dash cams, stern cams, deck cams. They upload to the cloud every hour." I lowered the tablet. "You forgot to disable the cameras, son. You were so focused on the heat that you forgot about the eyes." Dante covered his face with his hands. Oh God. "I have the footage," I said. "I have the rental agreement with your forged signature. I have the purchase order for the steel lock, which you bought on my credit card, by the way." Stupid. Very stupid. I leaned down close to his ear. "I own the crime scene, Dante. And I own the evidence." Dante looked up at me. His eyes were red and swollen. "Are you going to turn me in?" he asked. "Are you going to call the police?" I stood up and smoothed my jacket. "The police are for strangers, Dante," I said. "For you, I have something much worse in mind." I turned to Sal. "Get him off my boat, Sal. And tell the boys at the shop to strip this vessel. I want the cabin door removed and preserved. Wrap it in plastic. Mark it as Exhibit A." "You got it, Mr. Holloway," Sal said, grabbing Dante by the arm and hauling him to his feet. "Dad, wait!" Dante screamed as Sal dragged him down the dock. "Dad, what are you going to do?" I looked at him one last time. "I am going to let you go home, Dante," I said. "I am going to let you go back to Chloe. I want you to tell her that the boat is gone. I want you to tell her that I own the company. And I want you to tell her that I have the video." Dante struggled, but Sal's grip was iron. "Why?" he yelled. "Why tell her?" "Because I want to watch you eat each other," I said. I turned my back on him. I walked to the bow of the boat. I looked out at the ocean. The heat was rising. It was going to be another scorcher today. But I didn't feel the heat anymore. I felt the cold precision of justice. "Run home, Dante," I whispered to the wind. "Run home and tell your wife that the trap has snapped shut, and you are both inside." I heard the sound of Dante's car peeling out of the parking lot. He was running. He was terrified. I took a deep breath of the salt air. The evidence was secured. The yacht was mine. Now it was time to pull the financial trigger. I took out my phone and dialed Vance. "Execute the freeze," I said. "What about the accounts?" Vance asked. "Freeze them all," I said. "Every dime. Every penny. Cut off the credit cards, cancel the fuel cards, even the family Netflix account." "You want them in the dark?" Vance asked. "I want them in the Stone Age," I said. I hung up. I walked off the boat, my cane tapping a victory march on the wooden planks. The water lapped gently against the hull of the Silver King. It sounded like applause. I got into my car and drove away, leaving the marina behind. The net was tight, the fish were thrashing, and I was just getting started. You know the saying about rats deserting a sinking ship? They do not say goodbye to the captain. They do not help the other passengers. They just run. They scramble over each other, clawing and biting to get to the last piece of dry wood before the water swallows them whole. I was sitting in my living room watching the two biggest rats I had ever known panic. Chloe had a plan. I knew she had a plan because I had been monitoring her internet search history for the last 48 hours. While Dante was out at the marina getting humiliated by my new employees, Chloe was packing. Not clothes, not toiletries. She was packing the liquid assets. She had a bag hidden in the back of her closet, a go bag. Inside was her passport, a burner phone, and the account numbers for the joint savings account where she had been stashing the money she siphoned off my estate. She thought she was clever. She thought that while Dante was dealing with the boat, she would slip away to the bank, make a withdrawal, and catch a flight to the Caymans before the police realized the accident was a felony. She didn't care about Dante. She didn't care about the Miami villa anymore. She just wanted to survive. I watched her leave the house at 9 a.m. She was wearing a scarf over her head and big sunglasses like some discount movie star trying to be incognito. She drove her Mercedes like she was qualifying for NASCAR, speeding out of the driveway without even looking back at the house she had poisoned me to inherit. She headed straight for the First National Bank downtown. I took a sip of my iced tea. It was cold, sweet. The condensation dripped down the glass onto my hand. It was a beautiful sensation. I wasn't worried. I wasn't rushing to stop her. I had already made a phone call. You see, in the logistics business, you make friends. And in the Navy, you make brothers. One of my brothers from the old days works in a very quiet, windowless office at the Department of Homeland Security. We served on the same carrier group in the Gulf. I saved his life once during a fire below decks. He owes me. I called him yesterday. I told him I had concerns about some irregularities in my family's finances, specifically regarding my son's heavy involvement in unregulated cryptocurrency exchanges and offshore NFT markets. I suggested that perhaps some of those transactions looked a lot like money laundering, maybe even financing for groups that the United States government does not like very much. My friend didn't ask for proof. He just asked for the account numbers. So while Chloe was speeding toward the bank, thinking she was about to withdraw $200,000 in cash, a red flag was popping up on a server in Washington, D.C., a flag that freezes assets faster than liquid nitrogen. I imagined the scene inside the bank. I could see it as clearly as if I were standing there. Chloe walking up to the teller, the forced smile, the shaking hands. "I need to make a withdrawal," she would say, sliding the slip across the marble counter. All of it, cash. The teller would type in the account number. She would smile politely, then her face would change. The smile would drop. She would look at the screen and blink. "One moment, Mrs. Holloway," she would say. She would press a silent button under the desk. Chloe would tap her nails on the counter. Click, click, click. She would check her watch. She would look at the door. Then the manager would come out. He wouldn't invite her into his office. He would stand behind the glass partition. "I am sorry, Mrs. Holloway," he would say loud enough for the security guard to hear. "We cannot process this transaction." "What do you mean?" Chloe would snap. "It is my money. I am a signatory on the account." "The account has been frozen," the manager would say. "By federal order." "Federal order," Chloe would whisper, the blood draining from her face. "Homeland Security." The manager would continue looking at her with suspicion. Section 311 of the Patriot Act. Suspicion of terrorist financing and money laundering through illicit cryptocurrency channels. Terrorist financing. The words would hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't a terrorist. She was just a greedy thief. But the banking system doesn't know the difference when the right flag is raised. She would look around. She would see the security guard stepping forward. She would see the other customers staring. She wouldn't argue. She wouldn't ask to see the manager. She would run. She would grab her purse and sprint out of the lobby, her heels clattering on the floor, leaving her dignity and her money behind. I checked my watch. 10:30. She would be home in 20 minutes. And she would be furious. I went to the kitchen and refilled my tea. I added extra ice. The clinking sound was cheerful. Dante came home first. He walked in looking like a ghost. He had walked all the way from the marina because I had frozen his Uber account too. His shirt was soaked with sweat. His face was red and peeling. He slumped onto the sofa, staring at the wall. He didn't see me sitting in the armchair in the corner. I was part of the furniture now, the silent observer. Then the front door banged open. Chloe stormed in. She wasn't wearing the scarf anymore. Her hair was wild. Her eyes were manic. She looked like a woman who had looked into the abyss and found it staring back. She saw Dante. "You!" she screamed. She threw her purse at him. It hit him in the chest with a heavy thud. "What did you do, Dante?" she shrieked, marching over to him. "What did you do with the crypto accounts? Who did you trade with?" Dante looked up confused and broken. "What? Chloe, what are you talking about?" "I lost the boat. He owns the boat." "I don't care about the boat," she yelled, grabbing him by the lapels of his suit. "I went to the bank. I tried to get the cash. The emergency money. It is gone, Dante. It is frozen." "Frozen," Dante repeated. "Terrorist financing," she screamed, shaking him. "The bank manager said terrorist financing. He said Homeland Security frozen the assets because of your stupid monkey pictures. You idiot, you moron. Who were you dealing with? Were you laundering money for the cartel? Were you sending money to insurgents?" Dante pushed her away. No, I swear. It was just pump and dump schemes, just regular scams. I didn't do anything with terrorists." "Well, somebody thinks you did," she cried, pacing the room like a caged tiger. "They locked it all. The joint account, the savings, even my personal checking account because it is linked to yours. I have $0, Dante. 0. My credit cards were declined at the gas station. I had to drive here on fumes." She kicked the coffee table, sending a vase crashing to the floor. "We are trapped," she wailed. "We have no money. We have no passports. The feds are probably watching the house right now." Dante put his head in his hands. "It is Dad," he sobbed. "It is him. He is doing this." Chloe stopped pacing. She turned to look at the corner where I was sitting. I took a sip of my tea. The ice cubes chimed. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. If looks could kill, I would have died right there in the armchair. But she had already tried to kill me and failed, so I wasn't worried about her eyes. "You," she hissed. "You did this. You called the feds." I swirled the tea in my glass. "I have a duty as a citizen, Chloe," I said, my voice calm and conversational. "If I suspect financial irregularities involving national security, I have to report it, especially when the suspect is living under my roof." "You ruined us," she screamed, lunging toward me. "You destroyed everything." She stopped short of hitting me. Maybe she remembered the cane. Maybe she remembered that I was a Master Chief who had survived hand-to-hand combat while she was still learning to walk in heels. "You ruined yourselves," I said, setting the glass down on the coaster. I just turned on the lights. She turned back to Dante. "Do something," she screamed at him. "Hit him. Kill him. Do something, you coward." Dante looked at me. Then he looked at her. He didn't move. "You are useless," she spat at him. "You are a weak, pathetic man. I should have left you years ago. I should have married the lawyer. I should have taken the money when I had the chance." She slapped him. It was a hard, vicious slap that echoed in the silent room. Dante took it. He didn't fight back. He just sat there accepting his punishment. I watched them, the perfect couple, the power couple, reduced to this: a screaming harpy and a broken man fighting over scraps in a house they didn't own. "It is over, Chloe," I said, standing up. "The money is gone, the boat is gone, the house is next." "What do you mean the house is next?" she asked, wiping her mouth. I checked my watch. "My lawyers are filing the eviction notice as we speak," I said. "Since the accounts are frozen, you can't pay the mortgage. And since the title is in my name," I smiled, "you are trespassing." Chloe looked around the room. She looked at the expensive furniture she had picked out. She looked at the life she had built on lies. She started to laugh. It was a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "You think you won?" she said. "You think you can just throw us out?" "I am pregnant." The room went silent. Dante looked up. You are pregnant." "Yes," Chloe lied, her eyes darting around the room. "I took a test this morning. That is why I went to the bank. I wanted to secure our future. For the baby." She looked at me, a smug smile forming on her lips. "You can't evict a pregnant woman, Marcus. It is illegal. You can't throw your grandchild onto the street. The courts won't allow it. The press will eat you alive." I looked at her stomach. I looked at her face. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a piece of paper. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a medical report. "I anticipated this," I said, unfolding the paper. "What is that?" she asked, her smile faltering. "This is a report from Dr. Evans," I said. "My personal physician, the one who treats the whole family." I held it up. "It seems Dr. Evans was reviewing the family medical history file I requested last week. He noted something interesting in your chart, Chloe. A procedure you had done 5 years ago, before you even met Dante." I read from the paper. "Patient underwent a bilateral tubal ligation. Procedure was successful. Patient is permanently sterilized." Dante stood up. His face was white. You tied your tubes," he whispered. Chloe's face crumbled. The lie evaporated instantly, leaving only the ugly truth behind. "Dante, please," she stammered. "I didn't want to ruin my figure. Kids are messy." "You lied to me," Dante shouted. "You told me we were trying. You told me you wanted a family. You told me that was why we needed the money. To build a nursery." "I told you what you needed to hear," she screamed back. "Because you are a child, Dante. You need a mommy, not a wife." Dante stared at her. For the first time, I saw something spark in his eyes. It wasn't love. It wasn't fear. It was hate. He walked over to her. He stood toe-to-toe with the woman who had manipulated him for years. "Get out," he said. What she asked. "Get out," Dante screamed, pushing her. "Get out of my face. Get out of this house. You can't kick me out," she yelled. "We are in this together." "Not anymore," Dante said. He looked at me. "Dad, call the police," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Call them," Dante repeated. "Tell them she stole the money. Tell them she forged the signature. I will testify. I will tell them everything." "You wouldn't dare," Chloe hissed. "You will go to jail too." "I don't care," Dante said, his voice breaking. "I don't care anymore. I just want you gone." I picked up my phone. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I called Vance. "It is time," I said into the receiver. "Bring the papers." I looked at the two of them standing in the wreckage of their marriage. The financial trap had snapped shut. But the real prison wasn't the frozen account. The real prison was the room they were standing in, and I held the only key. The sun had finally set over the estate, but the darkness brought no relief from the heat or the tension. The house was a pressure cooker, both literally and metaphorically. I had disabled the air conditioning hours ago, and the humid Florida air had settled into the corners of the room like a heavy, wet blanket. I sat in the main living room, the one with the vaulted ceilings and the expensive Italian leather furniture that Chloe had picked out with my money. I had rearranged the space. I pushed the coffee table aside. I pulled 2 straight-backed wooden chairs into the center of the room, facing the large, blank white wall above the fireplace. It was a setup I had used before. Briefing rooms, interrogation cells, courts-martial. The layout was designed to make the accused feel small, exposed, and vulnerable. I sat in my armchair in the shadows, the only light coming from the projector I had set up on the dining table. The fan inside the machine hummed a low, steady drone that sounded like a distant aircraft. I checked my watch. 2100 hours. Time for court to convene. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I simply picked up a small brass bell I kept on the mantel and rang it once. Ding! The sound was sharp and clear, cutting through the silence of the house. Upstairs, I heard the shuffle of feet. They were waiting for this. They had been huddled in the guest room, terrified, hungry, and turning on each other. They knew that the bell meant the waiting was over. Dante came down first. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. His shirt was unbuttoned, his chest shining with sweat. His eyes were darting around the room, looking for police, looking for lawyers, looking for a way out. There was none. The doors were locked. The windows were barred. The only exit was through me. Chloe followed him. She had tried to fix her hair, but the humidity had defeated her. She walked with a defiance that was brittle and ready to snap. She glared at me, her lips a thin line of white rage. She saw the projector. She saw the 2 wooden chairs. She hesitated on the bottom step. "Sit," I said. My voice was not loud. It was the voice of a commander. It was the voice that had ordered men into battle. It brokered no argument. They walked to the center of the room. Dante sat down heavily, his shoulders slumping. Chloe sat on the edge of her chair, her back straight, refusing to show weakness even as the sweat ran down her neck. "What is this, Marcus?" she asked, her voice tight. "Is this another game? Are you going to starve us? Are you going to dehydrate us?" I didn't answer. I picked up the remote control. "You wanted to know the truth," I said. "You wanted to know how I survived. You wanted to know why I am doing this." I pointed the remote at the wall. "I think it is time we watched a home movie." I pressed play. A beam of blue light cut through the darkness, hitting the white wall. The image flickered for a second, then stabilized. It was high-definition footage, crisp and clear. The timestamp in the corner read June 18th, 11:30 a.m. The scene was the deck of the Silver King. The camera angle was wide, capturing the stern, the cabin door, and the endless blue horizon. Dante gasped. He recognized it instantly. He put his hands over his mouth. On the screen, a younger version of Dante walked into the frame. He looked nervous. He was looking over his shoulder, checking to make sure the coast was clear. He held a heavy steel bar in his hands. I watched the real Dante in the chair. He was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face. "No," he whispered. "Turn it off. Please, Dad, turn it off." I didn't turn it off. I turned the volume up. On the screen, Dante slid the bar into the brackets across the cabin door. The sound of metal on metal rang out through the speakers, amplified in the silent living room. Clack. Thud. Then Chloe walked into the frame. She was wearing her bikini and holding a drink. She looked relaxed. She looked happy. She walked up to Dante, who was standing by the locked door looking sick. She put a hand on his chest. I watched the real Chloe in the chair. She went pale. She leaned forward, staring at her own image. On the screen, the digital Chloe smiled. It was a cruel, predatory smile. "Is it done?" she asked. Digital Dante nodded. "He is in there. The AC is cut. The power is out." "Good," Digital Chloe said, taking a sip of her drink. "Let him cook." The real Dante let out a sob. The real Chloe gripped the arms of her chair so hard her knuckles turned white. But the video wasn't over. On the screen, Dante looked at the door. "What if he wakes up?" he asked. "What if he screams?" "Let him scream," Chloe laughed. "The ocean is loud, baby. Nobody can hear an old man dying in a box." She leaned closer to the door, listening. She tapped on the metal with her fingernails. "Hey, Marcus," she called out on the video. "Is it getting warm in there yet?" She turned back to Dante and laughed again. "Roast the old man," she said. "Roast him until he is well done. Then we will be rich." The video froze on her face. Her laughing mouth open, her eyes hidden behind sunglasses, the ocean sparkling behind her. "Roast the old man." The words hung in the air like a poisonous fog. I pressed the stop button. The room plunged back into semi-darkness, illuminated only by the static blue screen of the projector. I stood up. I walked over to the table where I had placed a thick file folder. I picked it up. It was heavy. I walked over to them. I threw the folder onto the floor between their chairs. It landed with a heavy slap, sending a cloud of dust into the projector beam. "Apex Life Insurance," I said. "Policy number 894221X. Dante flinched as if I had thrown a grenade. "Double indemnity for accidental death." I continued, my voice dropping to a low growl. $10 million. That was the price tag, wasn't it? That was the payout for roasting the old man. I walked around them, circling like a shark. "You didn't just want me dead. You wanted me to suffer. You needed it to look like an accident so you could trigger the multiplier. You sat on that deck drinking my scotch while I clawed at the walls of an oven. I stopped in front of Chloe. You laughed," I said. Chloe looked up at me. The defiance was gone. Her eyes were wide with terror. "Marcus," she whispered. It was a joke. A bad joke. I was drunk. I didn't mean it. You meant every word I said. I saw the texts, Chloe. I saw the messages to the realtor. You had already spent the money before my body was even cold. You were buying a villa in Miami while I was swimming for my life. I turned to Dante. "And you," I said. "My son, the boy I taught to fish, the boy I carried on my shoulders. You locked the door. You slid the bolt. You looked me in the eye that morning and smiled knowing you were going to kill me." Dante slid off his chair onto his knees. He grabbed my hand. I pulled it away. "Dad, please," he begged. "She made me. She told me we had no choice. She said you were going to cut us off. She said we would lose everything." I was scared, Dad. I was weak. "Weakness is not an excuse for murder," I shouted. My voice cracked like a whip. I walked back to my chair and sat down. I looked at the two of them. Broken, sweating, pathetic. "I have enough evidence in this room to send you both to federal prison for the rest of your natural lives," I said. The video, the insurance fraud, the forged signatures on the rental agreement, the Homeland Security report on the money laundering. I paused, letting the weight of the sentence sink in. 25 years to life. No parole. You will die in a cage just like you wanted me to die in a cage. Chloe began to weep softly. Dante was rocking back and forth, moaning. But I said, leaning forward, "I am a generous man, and I am tired. I don't want to spend the next 2 years in court listening to your lies. I want this over." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single piece of paper. I placed it on the small table next to me. "I am going to offer you a deal," I said. "A one-time offer. It expires in 10 minutes. They both looked up, hope flickering in their eyes like a dying candle. "The district attorney is a friend of mine," I lied. "He is willing to offer a plea bargain. One of you goes down for the full count. Attempted murder, fraud, the whole book. Life sentence." I looked at Dante, then at Chloe. "The other one gets a deal. Cooperation. Testimony against the mastermind. 5 years probation. No jail time. Just a record and a debt." The room went silent. I saw the shift happen. It was subtle at first. A glance. A tightening of the jaw. "I call it the prisoner's dilemma," I said. "But in this family, it is just business." I tapped the paper. "I want the name of the architect. I want to know who planned it, who bought the lock, who forged the signature, who drove the boat." I looked at Chloe. "Was it him, Chloe? Did he force you? Was he the abusive husband who made you go along with his sick plan to kill his father?" Chloe's eyes narrowed. She looked at Dante. I saw the calculation. I saw the love evaporate if it was ever there at all. I looked at Dante. Or was it her son? Was she the Lady Macbeth who whispered poison in your ear? Did she threaten to leave you if you didn't do it? Did she buy the lock? Dante looked at Chloe. He saw her looking at him. He saw the bus coming and he saw her hand on his back ready to push. "You have 10 minutes, I said, checking my watch. "The first one to speak gets the deal. The second one gets the electric chair." I leaned back and crossed my arms. "Go." For a second, nobody moved. The only sound was the hum of the projector fan and the heavy breathing of two people realizing that there was only one life jacket. Then Chloe stood up. It was him, she screamed, pointing a finger at Dante. It was all him, Marcus. He bought the lock. He has the credit card receipt. He forged the insurance policy. I have the emails. He sent them from his laptop. I begged him not to do it. I told him it was wrong. He said he hated you. He said he wanted you dead so he could be free. Dante stared at her, his mouth open in shock. "You liar," he yelled, scrambling to his feet. "You liar. You bought the lock. You used my card because you maxed out yours. You planned the route. You told me to cut the generator." He turned to me, his hands shaking. "Dad, she is lying. It was her idea from the start. She found the insurance policy. She forged your signature. She practiced it for weeks. I have the practice sheets. They are in her nightstand. She kept them. She told me to roast you," Dante screamed, his voice breaking. "You heard her," she laughed. "She said it would be easy. She said you were just an old man in the way." "It was you," Chloe shrieked, clawing at him. "You drove the boat. You locked the door because you told me to," Dante yelled, pushing her back. "You said you were pregnant. You said we needed the money for the baby. You manipulated me." "I am not pregnant, you idiot," Chloe spat. "I played you because you are weak. You are a weak, spineless little boy who does whatever mommy tells him to do. She turned to me, her face twisted into a mask of ugly desperation. Marcus, look at him. He is pathetic. He couldn't plan a birthday party, let alone a murder. I have the evidence. I have the recordings. I recorded our conversations, Marcus, just in case he tried to back out. I have him on tape planning the whole thing. You recorded me, Dante whispered. Insurance, baby. Chloe sneered. Just insurance. She looked at me triumphant. I give you the tapes, Marcus. I give you the timeline. I give you everything. He goes to jail. I walk. That is the deal, right? I sat there watching them tear each other apart. It was visceral. It was ugly. It was the absolute truth of who they were, revealed in the harsh light of survival. They had forgotten I was even there. They were just two rats fighting over a scrap of wood in a flooding sewer. I stood up. Enough, I said. They both froze, panting, chest heaving. I walked over to the projector. I turned it off. The room went dark. I walked to the window and pulled back the heavy drapes. The moonlight flooded in cold and unforgiving. I have heard enough, I said. Who gets the deal? Chloe asked, stepping forward. Who won? I looked at them. You both lose, I said. What Dante asked. But, you said... I said I would ask for a reduced sentence for the one who cooperated, I said. I looked at Chloe. You admitted to conspiracy. You admitted to recording the planning of a murder. You admitted to knowledge of the crime. I looked at Dante. And you admitted to the physical act. You admitted to locking the door. I picked up the paper from the table. It wasn't a plea deal. It was a blank sheet of paper. There is no deal, I said. I lied. Their faces went white. You can't do that, Chloe screamed. You promised. I promised you a chance to clear your conscience, I said. Instead, you just proved that you are both monsters. You sold each other out in less than 30 seconds. There is no loyalty here. There is no love. There is just greed and fear. I pulled my phone from my pocket. It was already on a call. The timer read 20 minutes. Did you get all that, Vance? I asked. Loud and clear, Mac Vance's voice came through the speakerphone. The police are at the gate. We heard the confession. We heard the accusations. We have enough to bury them both under the jail. Police, Chloe whispered. They have been listening the whole time, I said. I walked to the front door. I unlocked the deadbolt. I opened the door. Blue and red lights were already flashing in the driveway. Sergeant Miller was walking up the path with 4 officers behind him. I turned back to my son and his wife. You wanted a liquidity event, I said. I pointed to the police. Here it is. You are about to be liquidated. Dante fell to the floor weeping. Chloe stood there staring at me with a look of pure shock. The performance was over. The curtain was falling, and the applause was the sound of handcuffs clicking shut. The sound of a police siren is usually a sound of alarm, but tonight it sounded like a symphony. It was the crescendo to the opera of greed I had been conducting for the last week. The blue and red lights washed over the living room walls, mixing with the harsh white light of the overhead fixtures I had finally turned back on. The shadows where Dante and Chloe had been hiding their secrets were gone. There was nowhere left to run. The front door didn't just open, it flew open. Sergeant Miller led the way, his service weapon holstered but his hand resting on it ready for trouble. Behind him were 2 detectives in cheap suits and 4 uniformed officers. They filled the foyer with the heavy, chaotic energy of the law. They didn't look like guests. They looked like the cleaners I had called to remove the garbage. Dante scrambled backward crab walking across my Persian rug until his back hit the fireplace. He was hyperventilating his chest, heaving his face a mask of absolute terror. He looked from me to the police and back again, trying to process that the nightmare wasn't waking up, it was just getting started. Chloe stood her ground for a second longer. She smoothed her dress. She raised her chin. She tried to summon the arrogance that had carried her through 30 years of manipulation, but I saw her hands shaking. I saw the way her eyes darted to the side door, calculating a sprint that she knew she couldn't make in those heels. Miller stepped into the center of the room. He looked at me and nodded a silent acknowledgement of the signal I had sent via Vance. Then he turned his attention to the 2 people cowering before him. Dante Holloway and Chloe Holloway. Miller boomed, his voice filling the vaulted ceiling. You are under arrest. On what charges? Chloe shrieked. Her voice was shrill, painful to hear. This is a domestic dispute. My father-in-law is senile. He is holding us hostage. You should be arresting him. Miller didn't blink. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. We have a warrant signed by Judge Patterson, he said calmly, based on digital evidence audio recordings provided by Mr. Marcus Holloway and the sworn testimony of your rental agent. He took a step closer. You are being charged with attempted murder in the 1st degree. conspiracy to commit wire fraud, insurance fraud, grand larceny, and aggravated elder abuse. Elder abuse? Chloe scoffed. We take care of him. Miller looked at the sweat soaking her dress. He looked at the blocked windows. He looked at the thermostat that I had finally reset but still read 85 degrees. It looks like you were trying to cook him, Miller said dryly. Officer, take them into custody. The chaos that followed was ugly. It wasn't like the movies where the bad guys put their hands up and walk away with dignity. It was a brawl of desperation. Dante broke first. As the officer approached him with the cuffs, he lunged, not at the cop, but at Chloe. You did this, he screamed, his voice raw and tearing at his throat. You lied to me. You said we would be safe. You said he was dead. He grabbed her arm, digging his fingers in. Tell them, Dante yelled, shaking her. Tell them it was your plan. Tell them about the lock. Chloe screamed, clawing at his face. Her nails left red streaks down his cheek. Get off me, you loser, she shrieked. It was you. You drove the boat. You are the murderer. I just watched. The officers moved in. They pulled them apart. It took 2 men to hold Dante down as he thrashed, kicking at the furniture, kicking at the life he was losing. They forced his arms behind his back. I heard the sound. Click, click. The ratcheting sound of steel cuffs locking onto bone. It is a final sound. It is the sound of a door slamming shut that will not open again for a very long time. Dante stopped fighting the moment the metal touched his skin. He went limp. He collapsed onto the rug, weeping openly. Snot ran down his nose, mixing with the blood from Chloe's scratch. Dad, he sobbed, burying his face in the carpet. Dad, please. I am your son. Don't let them take me. I am scared. I can't go to jail. I am not built for jail. I stood by the mantel, leaning on my cane. I looked down at him. You are right, Dante, I said quietly. You aren't built for jail. You are built for country clubs and easy money. You are soft. I watched the officer haul him to his feet. But you are going to learn to be hard, I said, just like I had to learn when you locked me in that box. Chloe was a different story. When the officer grabbed her wrist, she didn't fight with her fists. She fought with the only weapon she had left, her lies. She threw herself onto her knees. She looked at Miller, then at me, her eyes wide and imploring. Wait, she screamed. You can't do this. You have to be careful. She looked at the officer holding her arm. Let go of me, she yelled. I am pregnant. The room went silent. The officer hesitated. He looked at Miller. Nobody wants to be the cop who manhandles a pregnant woman, even a murderer. Chloe saw the hesitation. She seized on it. She played the victim card with everything she had. I am carrying a baby, she sobbed, holding her stomach protectively. I am in my first trimester. It is high risk. The stress. You could kill the baby. Do you want that on your conscience? She turned to me. She crawled forward on her knees, dragging the officer a few inches. Marcus, please, she begged, tears streaming down her face. I know you hate me. I know I made mistakes. But this is your grandchild. Your blood. Dante's son. You can't send your grandchild to prison. Please. Just house arrest. Just until the baby is born. I watched her performance. It was impressive. If I hadn't known better, I might have felt a flicker of doubt. She looked so small, so vulnerable. Dante looked up. His eyes were filled with a sudden, desperate hope. Dad, he whispered, she is right. The baby. You always wanted a grandson. You can't hurt the baby. Miller looked at me. Mr. Holloway, if she is pregnant, we have to follow protocol. We have to take her to the hospital first. It delays the booking. It complicates things. I looked at Chloe. She was hiding a smirk behind her tears. She thought she had found the loophole. She thought she had found the one thing that would make the old man pause. The legacy. The bloodline. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out the paper I had shown them earlier, the medical report from Dr. Evans. I walked over to Chloe. I stood directly in front of her. I loomed over her, casting a long shadow that blocked out the light. Stand up, Chloe, I said. She stood up, sniffing, wiping her eyes. You believe me, right, Marcus? You won't let them hurt the baby. I held up the paper. I told you earlier, Chloe, I said, my voice ice cold. I have the medical files. I have everything. I turned to Miller. Sergeant, this woman is not pregnant. Chloe's face went white. She tried to grab the paper, but her hands were cuffed. That is a lie, she screamed. That is fake. I read from the paper loud and clear so everyone in the room could hear. so Dante could hear. Patient name Chloe Holloway. Date of procedure, August 12, 2018. Procedure bilateral tubal ligation. Surgeon's notes indicate the fallopian tubes were cauterized and cut. Patient is permanently sterile. I lowered the paper. You had your tubes tied 5 years ago, Chloe, I said, before you even married my son. Dante let out a sound that wasn't human. It was the sound of a dying animal. You, what? He gasped. Chloe spun around, trying to silence him, trying to spin another lie, but the truth was naked in the room. It was for my health, she stammered. It was reversible. I was going to reverse it. It is not reversible, Chloe, I said. Not the way you did it. You made sure you would never have children. You made sure you would never ruin your figure. I looked at Dante. She lied to you, son, I said. All those months she talked about a nursery. All those times she said she was trying. She was playing you. She was using your desire for a family to manipulate you into murder. Dante stared at her. The betrayal was total. He realized that the woman he had killed for the woman he had destroyed his soul for had never loved him. She had viewed him as a mark, a paycheck. You monster, Dante whispered. You barren monster. Chloe's mask fell off completely. The tears stopped. The begging stopped. Her face twisted into a snarl of pure malice. Shut up, she spat at Dante. Shut up, you weak little man. I did you a favor. You would be a terrible father. You are a broke loser just like your mother was. She turned to me. She bared her teeth like a cornered rat. And you, she hissed. You old bastard. You should have died in that box. The world would be better off without you hoarding your money. I hope you rot in this big empty house. I hope you die alone. I smiled. It was a calm, peaceful smile. I won't be alone. Chloe, I said, I have my memories, I have my dignity, and I have the satisfaction of knowing that I flushed the toilet. I nodded to Miller. Get her out of my sight, Sergeant, and be careful with her. She isn't pregnant, but she is venomous. Miller grabbed her arm firmly. Let's go, Mrs. Holloway, he said. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it. They dragged her out. She was screaming curses now, kicking at the doorframe, spitting at the officers. She was ugly. She was raw. She was finally showing the world exactly who she was. Dante went quietly. He didn't look at me as they walked him past. He looked at the floor. He looked broken. I watched them go. I watched the police escort them down the driveway to the waiting cruisers. I watched the red and blue lights flash against the trees. The officers closed the back doors of the cars. Thud, thud. The sirens chirped as they pulled away. I stood in the doorway until the taillights disappeared around the bend. The silence rushed back into the house. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the heat wave. It was a clean silence. The silence of a storm that has passed. I walked back into the living room. I looked at the overturned chair. I looked at the projector still humming on the table. I picked up the medical report and tossed it into the fireplace. I picked up the lighter from the mantel. I lit the paper. I watched the flame curl the edges, turning the lies into ash. Don't drag a child into your filth, I whispered to the fire. I was alone. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt clean. The salt spray hitting my face felt different today. It was no longer the stinging slap of a hostile ocean trying to swallow a dying man. It was a cool, refreshing kiss from an old friend. I stood on the bow of my yacht, the teak deck vibrating gently beneath my feet as the engines hummed a steady, powerful rhythm. The boat cut through the Atlantic swells with the grace of a predator. The white fiberglass gleamed in the December sun. I walked to the railing and looked down at the name painted on the hull. 6 months ago, this vessel was called the Silver King. It was a rented trap, a floating oven designed to cook a father to death. But the Silver King was gone. I had bought the company, I had fired the staff, and I had stripped this boat down to its bones. I ripped out the carpets that smelled of my fear. I tore down the curtains I had used to survive, and most importantly, I took a blowtorch to the steel bar that had locked the cabin door. The boat was mine now, and I had renamed her, the Phoenix, because she had risen from the ashes of betrayal, and so had I. I wasn't wearing a suit today. I wasn't wearing a uniform. I was wearing a simple linen shirt and shorts. The scars on my back from the ventilation duct had faded to silvery lines. The skin on my face, which had peeled away after the heat wave, was tough and dark again. I looked younger than I had in years. Maybe it was the sea air, or maybe it was the lightness of having cut 200 pounds of dead weight out of my life. I held a small wooden box in my hands. It was made of cedar. It smelled of memories. Inside this box was not a body. It was a ghost. I opened the lid. Inside was a pile of ash and charred fragments. Last night I had built a fire in the pit in my backyard. I had gone into the attic. I had pulled down the boxes labeled Dante. I found his Little League participation trophies, the ones he got just for showing up, even though he spent most of the games complaining about the sun. I found his college acceptance letter, the one I had paid a consultant $50,000 to secure because his grades were mediocre. I found the first Father's Day card he ever made me, the one where he spelled my name wrong. I threw them all into the fire. I watched them burn. I watched the plastic trophies melt into toxic slag. I watched the paper turn to black butterflies that floated up into the night. It wasn't an act of hate. Hate is too hot. Hate implies passion. This was an act of sanitation. I was cleaning house. Now I stood over the water holding the last of the ash. I reached into the box. I grabbed a handful of the gray dust. It felt gritty, like the sand I had washed up on. "Goodbye, Dante," I whispered. I opened my hand. The wind caught the ash. It swirled for a moment, a small gray cloud against the brilliant blue of the sky, and then it scattered into the wake. The ocean swallowed it without a ripple. I did it again, and again, until the box was empty. I dusted off my hands. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel a sense of loss. I felt the click of a lock finally opening. I turned around. Sitting in the captain's chair holding a cold beer was Vance. He had come along for the ride. He was the only family I had left. "Is it done?" Vance asked, looking at the empty box. "It is done," I said. "The nursery is closed." Vance nodded. He reached into his briefcase, which looked out of place on a boat, but Vance never went anywhere without paperwork. "I have the final drafts of the trust, Mac," he said. "Just need your signature." I walked over. I took the pen. I looked at the document, the Holloway Foundation for Homeless Veterans. It was a simple document, but it carried the weight of an empire. It stated that upon my death, or sooner if I chose, every single asset I owned, my company, my real estate, my stocks, my liquidity, would be transferred to the foundation. Every penny would go to building housing for men and women who had served their country and come back to nothing. Men who knew the value of loyalty. Men who had sweated in deserts and jungles not for an inheritance but for a flag. I signed my name, Marcus T. Holloway. The signature was bold and unwavering. And the specific bequests, Vance asked, tapping the bottom of the page. I looked at the clause. It was my favorite part. "To my son Dante Holloway and his wife Chloe Holloway, currently residing in the Federal Correctional Institution, I leave the sum of $1 each." Vance smiled a small, dry smile. $1 Mac. "The judge might think you are being petty." "It is not petty, Vance," I said, capping the pen. "It is practical." "Practical how?" "A stamp costs 68 cents, I said. "I want them to have enough money to buy an envelope and a stamp." "So they can write you an apology?" Vance asked. "No," I said, looking out at the horizon. "So they can write to each other, because nobody else is going to answer their letters." I thought about them sitting in their cells. Dante had taken a plea deal. 20 years. He had cried during the sentencing, begging the judge for leniency, claiming he was manipulated. The judge, a stern woman who didn't like men who tried to kill their fathers, gave him the maximum allowed under the plea. He would be 58 when he got out. He would be an old man with soft hands and a felony record. Chloe had fought. She went to trial. She thought she could charm the jury. She thought she could cry her way out of it. But the prosecutor played the tapes. He showed the video of her laughing on the deck. He showed the medical records proving she lied about the baby. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. 25 years. She screamed as they dragged her away. She blamed Dante. She blamed me. She blamed the world. She never once blamed herself. I took the beer Vance offered me. It was cold. It tasted of hops and freedom. I walked back to the railing. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. It was the same view I had seen from the water when I was swimming for my life. But now I was above the waves. I thought about the journey, the heat, the darkness, the betrayal. It had broken my heart, yes, but it had saved my soul. If Dante hadn't locked me in that cabin, I might have died in my sleep a year from now, leaving everything to a son who despised me. I might have let my legacy be squandered on villas and gambling. I might have gone to my grave thinking I was loved. The truth is a painful medicine, but it cures the disease. I took a sip of beer. I looked at the wake of the Phoenix. The white foam churned and faded, disappearing into the vast blue history of the ocean. "We are clear, Vance," I said. Vance raised his bottle. "To clear waters, Mac." I turned the wheel. The Phoenix banked sharply, heading back toward the shore. Toward the future. Toward the work I still had to do. I wasn't just a survivor. I was a builder. And now I was going to build something that would last longer than blood. I looked directly at you, the viewer. The one who has followed me from the locked cabin to the open sea. They say blood is thicker than water, but greed acts like a thinner that dissolves even the strongest bonds. My son thought he could discard me like broken cargo, forgetting that I spent a lifetime navigating storms he couldn't even imagine. I didn't survive the heat to seek revenge. I survived to ensure justice. If you raise a child without teaching them the value of earning their way, don't be surprised when they try to steal yours. Protect your neck, secure your legacy, and never turn your back on the ocean or a greedy heir. If you enjoyed this ride on the Phoenix, do me a favor. Smash that like button like I smashed the lock on this cabin door. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice served cold. And tell me in the comments below, would you have left them the dollar or would you have left them nothing at all? I will be reading your answers from the deck. Until next time, stay vigilant and keep your head on a swivel. Out.